So, hello everyone. Today we're doing something a little differently. I've included the Instagram family. I can't see what they're seeing. I'm just letting them eavesdrop on what's happening with the live stream today. But I was going to do that last week, and the camera wouldn't cooperate, this one. So I kind of postponed it till now. I did discover that even as I was working on this camera today and I had everything ready to go, and it was 2:07, I'm ready to go, I heard click, and it turned itself off. Now remember last week I couldn't get the camera to cooperate at all. And I went ahead and reset it to factory specs, which turned off the infinity setting that I had found somewhere buried deep in the menus. And I had to go through pages and pages and pages of menus to find that silly thing. So hopefully today we'll have a nice clean connection and we will enjoy 4K and it won't turn off every 10 minutes to where I need to run around behind it and hit continue. Today's topic is going to be about sand beds. We've talked about it previously on this channel and I wanted to revisit it. We do a live stream pretty much almost 52 times a year, and so we are going to be talking about things we've discussed in the past. I can't help it. I've been live streaming on YouTube now for about 4 years, I would imagine, and we have hundreds of videos in that time. And the sand bed is actually comes up a lot. People will tell me, how do you keep your sand bed so white? I'm scared to touch it. If I add sand to my tank, will it cause a cycle? These are some of the ones that come off the top of my head, but there's been plenty more. I know some people want to use black sand. Some people hate sand and want no sand. And with all those different choices, it is a lot to discuss. So I thought that would be a good topic for today as we stay inside and avoid the heat and enjoy some AC. And so we will do that. So I see that quite a few have joined us. We're already at 56 people on YouTube. And I hope that you find this conversation useful to you and help you with your own reef tank, because that's the whole point of this channel, is to give you information that will benefit you and your tank so that your babies can be healthy and grow to be big and beautiful. So let's just start off. There's different choices of sand beds. Obviously there is the shallow sand bed, which is going to be just enough to hide the glass on the bottom, or the acrylic if your tank is made that way. And then there's going to be about 2 inches of sand, which is kind of a medium sand bed. And then typically a deep sand bed would be about 4 to even 6 inches of sand. And then if you are a person that's running a species-only tank like garden eels, I've been told from public aquariums the sand bed has to be about 24 inches tall. So that's like the whole aquarium, and then you have these garden eels sticking out the top, and their body goes way down deep into the sand. I've always thought it'd be cool to do that, but I've never tried it because I don't have any tank that would work in that scenario, and I don't know that I want to set one up for that specific need. Now, the sand bed behind me right now, this is Tropic Eden Reef Flakes. It's a larger grade of sand. According to the packaging, it's up to 3 millimeters in size, and it doesn't blow around. And that's very important. Back, 20 years ago, everyone wanted oolitic sand, which is like dust, like moon dust. And if you did anything in the tank, you created a moon cloud. It went everywhere. It got between your magnet and the glass. It scratched the glass. It was a whole beating. And I never liked oolitic. I thought it was horrible, just a terrible choice, and so I didn't do that. Also, people want to know where they can buy their sand and what can they use, and can they just get some sand at Home Depot? What about play sand? No, you absolutely cannot use play sand from a hardware store. It might be fine for kids to play in. It is not fine for a reef tank. It is a terrible choice. There's actually all kinds of stuff in there that could even include metals, and while you may not readily see it, if you set up a tank that way, you will just watch the livestock decline over time, and you will finally say, okay, play sand doesn't work, but at the cost of what? Your time, your reef, your animals. It's just a bad decision. Please don't do it. There are different brands on the market, like Carib Sea. I mentioned Tropic Eden. Who else has it? I don't even know, because I don't shop for sand very often. I've been using the same sand forever. The sand behind me here, I got on a pallet in 2010. And the sand I put inside my frag system 2 or 3 weeks ago, that was actually more Tropic Eden that a club member had that he'd never used, still brand in the bag, poured it in there. And that one's a little finer grade, is probably better for a fish only, but it's sand and I love sand. Now, if you want to have a bare bottom tank, the downside of a bare bottom tank, to me, is it doesn't look natural. Whenever I go diving, which I haven't done in a while, is I see sand and I see rock. I never see the glass bottom of the ocean. I never see what makes me feel completely unnatural. I just feel like a glass box with nothing on the bottom, feels like a museum display. It's not natural. It's not pleasant. I don't even know what to tell you. I mean, I don't even know what to compare it to. If you had a beautiful house and you had no lawn, I guess that would be the look. You know, it's just ugly. And so we put a lawn in front. We put some hedges and stuff and make it nicer. The sand bed, I feel, is very important to the look of the reef, and it does do some beneficial things. It allows bacteria to live within it. It allows worms to live within it as well. There are certain snails that dwell in it. There are wrasses that sleep in it. There are cucumbers that feed through it. So sand is actually a beneficial thing. And the biggest thing for me about sand is that when the light hits the sand, it ricochets off of it and hits the underside of the corals. Where if you have a glass bottom or if you have a black sand, it just soaks up the light and has nowhere to go. And the corals are only getting lit from above rather than from below. So it's really important to keep that in mind. It might be a factor that could affect the outcome of how your tank is doing. So I like sand. If you're worried about cleaning near the edge, like for example, if I wanted to clean in this area right here and I put in a credit card or a spatula or I don't know what, just to kind of scrape through there, will that hurt your tank? Absolutely not. Feel free to clean that area. We're talking about an area that maybe is an inch thick as you mess around with it. You're not going to decimate or anything or release something evil into the tank, so don't fear that. I've usually about 2 times a year, I will go around with a spatula of some kind, something from the kitchen, because it has a handle, and I can work my way between and kind of just scrub away all the stuff that's between the glass and the sand, so it looks nice, and that doesn't scratch the glass. Now, sand getting stuck behind your cleaning magnet, and as you work the magnet across, could really scratch it. And so you want to be aware, and most people try to not go all the way down to the bottom. They may go to about an inch of the sand bed, cleaning the glass with a cleaning magnet, and then they'll use a tool to get the very bottom inch between the sand bed and where they left off, some kind of like a razor blade. And if you have a tank that's made of acrylic, sand is unfortunately a real problem for an acrylic tank owner because if any of that sand does get between your cleaning magnet, it can scratch it. If anything gets between your cleaning magnet and the acrylic, it will scratch it. Acrylic is that soft. So that is one of the reasons I like glass tanks. Someone just asked me this week, why don't you just build yourself a new acrylic tank? And I said, because it scratches so easily. And I just have no desire to deal with that and sand it out every once in a while. I just don't want to do that. I want glass because I can go a lot longer with it. The aquarium behind me has some scratches in it, and some were accidents. One was me trying something out that was new that did scratch it. I was like, dang it. And the tank is coming up on 8 years old. So the few scratches I have, it just is what it is, and I'm just going to have to accept it. You can't really easily polish out the inside of a glass tank. If you had a scratch on the outside, there is a technique that glass workers could use to polish out. Like if someone had a child that somehow scratched the outside of the tank, yes, someone that works with glass could actually mend that and help remove that look. But on the inside of the tank has to be completely drained, completely empty of all livestock, and deal with it. And no one that I know of has ever paid to have the inside of a glass tank polished out. They just get a new tank, or they rebuild it with a new piece of glass on the front. Or they turn the tank around the other direction because the back has never had a scratch on it, and now it's like brand new glass. I mean, there's a few things you can do. The thing about a bare bottom tank also that I'm very aware of, and I've seen it in many homes, is when there is no sand whatsoever, all of the detritus blows around and is on the bottom, and so you're constantly having to vacuum that out to make it look clean, to make it look nice, because now you have this weird stuff, in the middle or on the side or in a pile, and that kind of stuff. I mean, if you don't know what that might look like, look in your sump. There's detritus down in there in certain places, not everywhere, and it's kind of weird, like tumbleweeds of dirt, and so a person with a bare bottom tank is going to constantly adjust their flow to blow it to one area, and then they have to basically siphon it out about once a week to maintain a look that looks clean. Now, a bare bottom tank also could have corals growing all over the bottom, and that way you're hiding the glass, but it takes a long, long time to do that. It's not like you can just put 15 plugs down there, frag plugs, and just in 6 months have a nice coated base. That's not how it works. It could take years, and if anything goes wrong, some of those things on the bottom that took so long to grow could die, and now you've got this big sore spot, or you have to wait again for it to fill in again. So that's kind of a drawback. So for me, I prefer sand bed, and I actually like a deep sand bed. I like the 4 inches. The anemone cube has 2 inches because the tank is so small. And I just felt like a 4 inch sand bed would just limit how much water was still left in the aquarium for the anemones, and I didn't want to restrict it or miss out on it. Now, some people will vacuum the sand bed on a regular basis. And most people that run a deep sand bed never vacuum it at all. And in the case of the tank reset, if you sat through these 7 hours of live streaming, you'll see we vacuumed out a whole bunch of detritus. A whole bunch of brown came out of my 8-year-old sand bed, and I wasn't even surprised. But what we didn't siphon out was black. We didn't siphon out sulfuric stuff. We didn't siphon out anything evil that everyone always implies must be in your sand bed because it's so old. And when I've had to break down tanks in the past, I broke down a tank that was 6 years old. There was no black pockets inside there. There was no sulfuric smell. It literally was just really dirty sand. And all I did was scoop out all the disgusting. I washed all the sand in water outside with a garden hose, drained off all of it so it's just moist sand, and put it back in the tank. You don't need to rinse it with RO water or anything like that. All you have to do is just wash it. And what's neat about washing sand is the sand is relatively heavy. Detritus is lighter. And so as you're washing it in a big barrel or tub or whatever you're going to use, the stuff will just lift right off, or you can stir or jam a hose deep down into the sand and make all the brown fluff up to the top, and then pour the bucket out and pour the bucket out. One guy had a suggestion, and he posted on one of my videos saying you could put the sand in a pillowcase and then just run water through it, and the detritus will come right out the pores of the pillowcase. I don't know if that works, but I like the idea. So if you end up doing it and you find that that is a successful thing, I may copy it one day. I'm not, I don't know. I don't like my pillowcases. But how about that? Some people find that it's easier to wash sand in a large trough that's wide and shallow versus a 5-gallon bucket where you have a limited space. But I don't know. I've just done it in a bucket, and I just work my way through it, and it'll take me a few hours to wash a lot of sand. But then once it's poured off, all that is damp sand. There's nothing evil in it. You don't have to worry about whatever's in the tap water because you poured out all the water. You're down to moisture now. And that sand can now go in your tank. And will it cause a cycle? No. It can't. It's just wet sand. I mean, that is it. There's nothing in it that's evil that can hurt your tank. So go ahead and fill up your tank with salt water or RODI water and then salt, or however it is you start your tanks. And the sand will be just fine. And if you take the sand out of your existing tank for some reason, for example, if I want to take sand out of this tank that's been running for so long, the best advice always given is to remove it in sections. So I would take out maybe 25% of the sand, and then the next week take out another 25%, and then the next week another 25%, and then finally, after 4 weeks, take out the last quarter of the sand bed, and now the sand is gone. And what about adding new sand to an existing setup? I have an article about that I wrote many, many years ago. What I take is I take a brand new bag of sand from the fish store. I wipe it down with a clean towel just to kind of get off whatever might be on the packaging. And then I slice open the top. And then the tank itself, I stop all the flow in the tank. And I move corals out of the way so that I have a big empty spot. And I will just take that bag and I will invert it all the way down to the bottom of the tank, and then kind of lift, and the sand will just kind of gradually pour out, and I can keep lifting the bag, and I'll have this mound of sand, and then I spread it out evenly to get a nice level terrain. The general rule of adding sand to an aquarium is usually best to just put in 1/2 inch of new sand on top of the existing sand bed, because all the stuff that's in there that's alive is in the top 1/2 inch. And as you go deeper, there's less stuff. And so if you were to smother it with like 2 inches of sand because you want to double your sand bed, all of a sudden, you will literally kill all the bacteria. And it'll just smother down there, and you'll have new sand, and whatever bacteria on the rock will migrate into the top layer. So it's better to do about 1/2 inch. So maybe work on your tank in areas, or just do a 1/2 inch once a week. And let the stuff migrate up, and then in another week, put in another 1/2 inch of sand and migrate it up until you've got to your desired depth. This is a really easy way of adding sand to a tank, and I used to do it twice a year with my 280 because the tank was consuming sand. It was actually using it up. And my assumption is that the lower pH deep in the sand bed where the oxygen is less was dissolving the calcium carbonate, because that's the sand we like to use. We like calcium-based sand. And to know if you have calcium-based sand, is take some of your sand and put in a bowl with some vinegar and see if it starts to dissolve. And if it just sits in there, it's not calcium based, it's not going to melt, and it likely could be silica based. And we really don't like silica sand, it's just not pretty. That kind of sand is often used for sandblasting to clean things. So I've seen tanks, and as soon as I walk up to the tank, I can know with a glance if it's silica. It's kind of a grayish hue versus stuff like what I have here, which is considered in the Fiji pink family. I know it's funny they say pink. There's really not much pink in it, but it's a really good sand. I like. I've used different brands over the years. I think Carib Sea, Arag Alive, and Tropic Eden are the 2 bags I've always bought. And what about crushed coral? Some people like crushed coral. That was something used way back in the day. Crushed coral isn't ideal for a reef tank. It may be good in a fish only, where you just need something on the bottom, because the critters and the worms and stuff don't do well in crushed coral, and crushed coral traps a lot of detritus, and it can actually elevate nitrates in the tank significantly, and no matter what you do, they never seem to come down because of the crushed coral. So you don't want to go that route, most likely. And then if you have things that need to live in the sand, like wrasses, they don't do well in crushed coral. It's just too hard on their fleshy bits, and they probably would get torn up or scratched up, even as they try to work their way in each night to sleep. So it's not really recommended in the reef tank, so I don't promote that whatsoever. I did have crushed coral in my 29-gallon back in, I guess 1997 to 1999, and maybe slightly longer. But when it was time to do something in the house, like recarpet or something, I took all the crushed coral out. I'd been vacuuming it, and I could never get it clean enough. I could never get everything out of it. And so I went ahead and I just removed it, and I put sand in there, and boom, the tank was doing much better thereafter. So I would definitely recommend going with just regular sand, and you can choose what grade you like. Like I said, the Reef Flakes from Tropic Eden is a really good one because it doesn't blow around. And that's one of the reasons why some people want the bare bottom tank. They want to run all their pumps at 100% and just move the water like a typhoon. And they said, that's all I need is tons of flow. And if I have sand, I can't do that. And yeah, you're right. You have to be more aware of where your power heads are, which direction they're pointed, how they are angled to move water through the tank without disturbing the sand bed too badly. But you need some movement across the surface of the sand so the sand stays clean. Because like I said, one of the first questions that a lot of people ask is, how is your sand so white? How is it so clean? Different things can happen on the surface of the sand bed, and that could be diatoms, it can be cyanobacteria, or it can be dinoflagellates. We don't want all 3 of them. to really simplify, diatoms are actually completely normal in a newer system. They happen in the first few months, and it's food for your bacteria, so the bacteria is eating the diatoms, and they are increasing in volume in your sand bed, in your rock work, and they're good for the denitrification of the tank. They're good for consuming waste. The bacteria is something a lot of us dose these days, and that diatom is a food source for bacteria. So nothing wrong with diatoms. They're kind of ugly. They're brown and dusty. They go away. They don't need help. You don't have to chemically do anything to get rid of diatoms. It's a phase, and it might last a few weeks or maybe a month, and then you just seem to never see it again. You will see what kind of looks at diatoms if you're running biopellets in your tank, because biopellets, just through the nature of how they operate, you'll get this weird mulm on the sand bed, M-U-L-M, and that stuff will be on the sand, and you're like, what is this brown stuff? And if you take your hand, just wave it back and forth over the sand, it lifts like dust, and then it settles again within a minute. That's a byproduct of running biopellets that I used to run into. I wasn't really a fan of it, but it was like, whatever. It just is what it is. I just have to deal with it. Now let me go back to the vacuuming of the sand bed. If you wanted to vacuum your sand bed, it's sort of a commitment as far as I'm concerned, in that, for example, the fish store down the street from me at Frank's Tanks, they will constantly vacuum the sand bed. And they do water, he was doing a lot of water changes for many years. He's actually backed off of how many he does. But he used to do like 3 water changes a week in every single tank. And he vacuumed the sand and vacuumed the tank. I mean, that's all he did. Every time he walked in, he had a hose in the tank and he was vacuuming sand. You constantly saw barrels of water being dumped out on the driveway. And he did that, and his sand always looked so white. And people are like, how do you do that? And he says, I vacuum my sand. But he was doing it 3 times a week. Who does that? I mean, no one is going to do that kind of tank maintenance. Most of us want to enjoy our tanks. We want to clean the glass. We want to feed the fish. And there are some of you out there that do automatic water changes. But even an automatic water change doesn't touch the sand bed. It's literally sucking out, 3-4 gallons a night and replacing it quietly while you sleep. So you've never actually touched the sand bed. Some people like to do water changes weekly, and they may choose to vacuum the sand bed every single week. I just find that if you vacuum it all the time, then when you don't do it, you get the weirdness and your sand isn't pretty anymore. It's almost like you have to keep doing it forever. Where my attitude is just leave the sand bed alone and don't mess with it, and just let your livestock and let your cleanup crew work on it, and it will continue to look nice. And so when people are like, well, what about your sand? I'm like, well, I mean, what about it? It looks fine. There might be some larger pieces of stuff down here, little bits of whatever, or a snail that fell off the glass. That's something you have to remove. But the sand itself is essentially clean. And when you see close-ups, you'll just see the grains of sand. It's not gross. So don't fear sand. And don't fear cleaning it. If you, like I said, when we did the reset of the reef and we moved so much stuff out of the way, I could actually vacuum. And I plan to vacuum it again because, like I said, the sand bed is going to be 8 years old November 10th. So today is July 10th, August, September, October, November. We've got 4 more months until the tank literally turns 8. And I will go ahead. I've got about 200 gallons of salt water behind me right there. And I plan to vacuum as much of the sand bed as I can to remove a little bit more of the brown muck that I found buried deep in my ancient sand bed. And I'm going to change probably about 200 gallons of water at the same time and hopefully bring these nitrates down even more. We've been talking about nitrates on this channel a lot. It's, if I didn't talk about nitrates on the channel, what would I talk about? Because every other parameter in my tank is fine. And I usually hate to say the word fine, but all my numbers continually come in where they belong. I have alkalinity stays pretty stable. Calcium tends to always be around 400, 410. Magnesium tends to be around 1400. When I did the ICP test, everything came back essentially great. The only thing that they didn't like was nitrate. And I don't like it either. So I'm going through a cleaning phase. I'm doing my spring cleaning during the summer. But, we removed 3 buckets of skeleton from under the reef, cleaning out the tank, and that was all just trapped waste and decay. And now I'm working on the sand bed down below to get it nice and cleaned out. And, beneath the sand bed, not down below. I cleaned out the refugium a week ago and used the vacuum attachment. I showed it to you guys last week. I love that thing. And I sucked out a whole bunch of detritus, and I feel like I need to do that some more. That's one of those ones that's kind of hard to do. You move the plants and you move the reborn media I used for my substrate, and the stuff kind of like floats up and lands somewhere else, and you're not quite getting it. I just want to somehow like bulldozer through really quietly and just kind of get it all from the bottom. So, I'll work on that and kind of work on that as well as, doing the upper section here of the DSB to make sure that's nice and clean. Now, things that will help keep your sand bed clean, I kind of glossed over it. So let's talk about some of the specifics and some of the things that I don't recommend. I'm going to start off with what I don't recommend. A sand sifting starfish does not belong in a reef tank. It is the wrong starfish. And a lot of people say that's the one to get. That is terrible advice. And a lot of fish stores will sell you one because you just asked to buy it, but they won't say, well, what do you have? What kind of a tank is it? And they just, I guess they assume, surely you have a fish only and you just want something to clean the sand. The sand-sifting starfish, its diet is to eat everything out of the sand bed, so nothing's left. It eats bacteria, it eats waste, it eats worms, it eats everything, and leaves you with a dead sand bed. And once your sand bed is dead, then you start getting all the nuisance algae and problems in your aquarium. You will still find people that will chime in on this channel that will say, hey, I've been having one in my tank for 6 years and I've never had a problem. Good for you. It's a lot of people that didn't go well for them. I don't know how you're pulling it off. I'm happy for you. It is not the right critter to be in a reef tank. I'm not going to recommend it, and I'm going to continue to say that, and I've been saying it for a very long time. If you do want starfish, Serpent starfish are perfectly fine. There are some brittle starfish that work, that are nice, but the green one is very aggressive and can eat your fish. So I don't recommend the green one because it gets so big. I mean, literally, I'm holding, it might be that big. It's from tip to tip. It's a huge starfish and it's super active. And you drop in food and the thing just cartwheels through your tank trying to grab anything it can catch out of the water column. And if it needs to, it will catch a fish and eat it, and you'll just be missing a fish. So don't get the green brittle starfish. But the black brittle, I never saw a problem with the one I had in my tank. I got it as a little tiny hitchhiker, and I thought, oh, it's one of those little ones that stays little. No, no, no. Mine grew to be about that big from end to end. It was dark black and lived in an acro colony, and it was really, really neat. And then one day I just didn't find it. I don't know what happened. Serpent starfish are my choice. And if you want a really cool serpent starfish, look for a harlequin serpent starfish, because the harlequin has these really neat markings and it's so pretty. And I believe, I know you can get them in Florida. I don't know if they come from Florida, if that's their natural habitat, but the harlequin starfish is a really cool one to have in your tank, and I wouldn't mind adding a couple to this tank now. Another creature that I like to have in the sand bed is the sand conch, which is this big slug in a shell. There's other conchs that are sold on the market, like the queen conch, the fighting conch, and there's probably, I don't even know how many there are. Maybe there's a myriad of different ones. The sand conch is the one you want. It's a smaller one. Fighting conchs work. Queen conchs are predatory. They will actually go after your snails and eat them, so I don't recommend that one. Plus, it should, in theory, grow to be really, really big, like the kind they hold up and blow in Hawaii to tell you it's dinner time. So don't recommend that type of conch. Just something small that's maybe 1 or 2 inches long and can live on your sand bed. It may try to go up the glass a little bit, and it very well could just bury itself in the sand. And you may not see it move for 3 weeks, and you just think it's dead. And then suddenly it just emerges back up, and it keeps going. And it's my opinion, because I never know anything for a fact, it is my opinion that while they're in the sand bed for those weeks, they're growing their shell. That's my theory. Maybe someday some Nat Geo will do a really cool documentary about sand conchs, and we'll learn what they're doing in the sand bed. You know, they'll do something where they can look through it with a night view, and I don't know. But I just think they're just making the shell a little bit longer, and then when it's hardened or whatever, they come back up and they continue about their... Because I don't think they ate so much food that they need to take a siesta for 3 weeks. I don't think that's what's happening. I think there's a purpose. And so I'm assuming it's to make the shell a little bit bigger. Nacerius snails are great little snails. They look a lot like whelks, so you got to make sure you're buying Nacerius snails. I believe it's Nacerius vibex, V-I-B-E-X, is the one we like to get. And they will bury themselves. I like the super tongue in Nacerius. That's another one you can definitely find. They're bigger. They're about the size of a grape. They will go right up the glass. They will come right down the glass. They will go across the sand, and they will bury themselves in the sand. They just, like their little body. I said a grape, but I'm thinking more like an olive. They will take their little olive body down into the sand, and there will be a periscope sticking up. That's their little appendage that they use for sniffing out food, possibly consuming. And when the food hits the water, they all come up out of the sand and start running around really quickly across the sand, slithering around, however you want to say it, moving about the sand. So whelks are bad, but Nacerius are good. So we want those in our tank. The reason you don't want a whelk is a whelk eats snails as well. Just like the queen conch, the whelks eat the other snails, and you end up with a bunch of empty shells, and you have a bunch of fat, healthy whelks looking for more meat to eat. So we don't want whelks. Those we don't want. Cucumbers, there are different ones, and there are people out there that will say, never get a cucumber. I disagree. There are certain ones that are better than others. Like the little tiny yellow ones that never move, they're kind of pointless. They're cool to look at, but they find one spot, and they glue to that spot, and then they stick out their filter feeders, and they just capture some food, but they never do anything. They don't clean anything. They aren't helpful. So that's, if you just want something bright yellow in your tank, you can get a couple of these 1-inch long things and stick them here and there, and you'll be, nice to look at, but it won't be anything that does anything for your tank specifically. I really like the tiger tail cucumber. I find that is a really beneficial cucumber that will literally, it has like 5 or 6, I never counted, like mops that come out on the sand, and they just like inhale some sand, and then it brings it back, and he puts it in his mouth, and the next one, and it's just mopping the sand constantly. And then out the other end of the cucumber, you get these little, what looks like pellets of sand that just break apart and looks like sand. So it has eaten all the food in the sand and has pooped out little pellets, and it's clean sand. So if you have a few of those in your tank, that'd be great. Oh, speaking of conchs, I want to go back 1 second. So sand conchs, in general, you want one conch per every 2 feet of sand. So if you have 24 inches by 24 inches of sand bed, you need one conch. I wouldn't put in 3 or 4 because they will starve. So let's stick to that. In my tank here, it's 7 feet by 3 feet. I could probably put in 4 or 5 conchs, and I have a lot of exposed sand now compared to before. My tank was maxed out and there wasn't very much room. In that case, I would have put in 2 because there's like 8 inches in the front and there was like nothing in the back, and then there was a little bit on that end where they could have had like another 2 inches of sand. So that, really 1 or 2 would all that would survive. The cucumbers, I would start with 1. It's possible that the tiger tail will grow to its size and split and make more of itself, so you don't even have to buy another one. Another type of creature that is in the cucumberish family would be the sea apple, which is really pretty, beautiful. My dad had one in his tank when I was a kid, and I'd stare at it. It seemed like for hours. Probably was minutes, but felt like hours. And it's really pretty, but they're very well known to be a grenade in your reef tank. If that thing dies, it just takes out your tank. So most people don't recommend putting the sea apple in a reef tank. That's up to you. But again, it's another one of these creatures that kind of parks in one spot and filter feeds the water. It may even need you to put in extra food to give it everything it needs, so it can do well. But it's kind of a ticking time bomb, so I don't recommend that. I don't recommend it at all. It's very rare. In all the tanks I visited, I've probably seen 3 sea apples in reef tanks, so I don't recommend it. Necarius, cucumbers, conchs. Those are the 3 that will help keep your sand bed clean. And then, of course, never neglect or omit hermit crabs. Now, the blue-legged hermit crabs are very aggressive, and especially the larger ones, and they're very active, but they're stirring the sand as they run across. They drag their shell behind them, and they are rutting the sand, and that's good. If you don't want aggressive hermits that constantly are eating things that you don't want them to consume, I would recommend the red-legged hermit crabs. The red legs, they're more brownish. They're not really red like you'd think. Those are nice. They're much friendlier. They're much more peaceful, or what I consider reef safe. And then for looks, if you want just a few, because they're more expensive, you can get the scarlet hermit crabs, which are blood red. They're really, really pretty, and they have these yellow eye stalks. They're really nice to have, and they will also work their way around the rockwork and down through the sand, so there's some activity there. Another thing that will help, but not so much the sand bed, even though I've seen them there as they travel about, would be urchins. And the diadema urchin is a well-known workhorse. If you have problems with green hair algae literally growing off your sand, the diadema urchin will just raise its way across it and just eat algae, which is nice, but you can get stabbed in the knuckles. No matter where you're cleaning the tank, that urchin always finds your knuckles and stabs you, and you're like, oh, that hurt. And it feels like a bee sting right in your knuckle. So be aware of that. So if you wanted something a little bit less dangerous to reach to reach into your tank, perhaps the tuxedo urchin would be a good choice. Now, tuxedo urchins, like diademas, they go everywhere. They will go up the glass, they will go across the sand, they'll go over the rockwork, and they will help to keep things clean and stirred. So these are some things that I like for stirring sand. Now, I'm sure some people are thinking, why haven't I mentioned a nice goby that will just grab mouthfuls of sand and just rain out their gills as they consume? Because gobies bury things I care about, because I'm notoriously known for putting corals on the sand. Like this right here, this is a really nice chalice, and I put it right there because it deserves some attention. And if I had a goby in this tank, it would cover it with sand, and I would have no chalice at all because it would die by the time I noticed. If you have fungias, scolies, chalices, acants, anything down on the sand, and you have gobies, there's a good chance they're going to bury it with sand as they're doing their thing, and they seem to enjoy doing that. So, and I'm not talking about all gobies. Some gobies don't move sand at all, but there are some that people specifically seek out, thinking that will keep my sand bed looking good, and that's a problem because, well, I just explained what you don't want to have happen. So you have to think which is the bigger curse. You're saying to yourself, but how do I have clean sand then? I need this goby. Well, no, you don't. I don't have one, and I have clean sand. So it's possible to do it without it. So don't feel painted into a corner. There are certain gobies that will find a spot they call home. I think the pearly jawfish, is that even a goby? Maybe that's jawfish. I don't even know. That one, it makes me think of a goby. But it will make a hole and go down in there and come out. It doesn't go out there sifting sand all the time, but it dwells in the sand. So it's a really pretty fish to have, but it wouldn't really do anything to help with your sand bed per se. How are we doing on time? All right, we're 35 minutes in. I'm trying to think of what other creatures can help keep the sand bed clean that I haven't mentioned. I really do run this live stream from the seat of my pants. I have so much knowledge in my head, that I just rack it off rather than having this bullet point list on my screen. I have too much on my screen as it is. I'm trying to keep up with you guys and keep up with the chat. Devin from Reef Dudes will literally be commenting to the camera and typing in the chat. I don't know how he does it. I am not a multitasker. I'm a tasker. So this is my task, and as I talk with you guys. I think that is all I can think of right now to keeping your sand clean. I'll tell you some tricks about moving water through your tank that maybe you haven't considered that will give you the flow you need without hurting your sand bed. A closed loop is a very old-fashioned way of moving water in a tank, and it works. And you basically have a hole somewhere low in the tank, and you have another hole somewhere low in the tank, and water sucks out of one hole. There should be a strainer there to keep livestock out. It sucks straight into a pump, and then it blows back out the other, and it's moving water through the plumbing and the pump, but never adding air to the water. It's not like it's draining from an overflow box where it's water and air combined, because then you'll just be pumping out bubbles into your system. Closed loop sucks, like for example, if there was a hole right here on my tank, that's about, 18 inches down from the glass? If there was a hole right there and there was a pipe that went down to a big old pump on the floor, and then there was a hole right here, down here, pushing water back in, it literally would be moving water. It'd be sucking water here and pushing water there, and you'd be creating good movement in the tank. And this is a good thing to do behind the rockwork, for example. But I'm always worried that any holes down low in the tank has a potential to be a leak, and then your entire tank will drain to that point. That's why this tank behind me has no holes in it anywhere except the teeth at the overflow box at the top, because I didn't want to take that chance. But there are guys that will have holes literally in the bottom of the tank pointing straight up, and they will have a nozzle coming out here, and they'll have a nozzle coming out here, and then they fill the tank with sand, but the nozzle is pointing up through the sand and blowing water up and away from the sand, so it doesn't move the sand at all. So the closed loop is drawing water in, and then it's coming up through these nozzles in different points of the tank and shooting water up at a 45 degree. They don't just point straight up and go straight up, because then you have this weird geyser on the surface of your tank. But instead they have these lock line nozzles. They can point different ways. And again, you have to make sure that nothing ever goes wrong there. You don't want anything to go wrong to where the bottom of the tank starts dripping. That would be a nightmare. It would be the worst thing you could imagine, because basically you have to handle it, and there's no easy way to fix that. It sounds like, just logistically, you're looking at draining the tank down, moving the sand completely out of the way, rinsing that area, and putting in a brand new bulkhead, and then refilling it. And that's a lot of work. Even if you're doing it in an emergency and you let the livestock be exposed and you remove as many fish as you can, and you pump the water in as rapidly as you can too. So in situations where you want to do closed loop, you're probably going to be best to make sure all the holes are the correct size to handle Schedule 80 bulkheads, because they're super beefy, going to last forever bulkheads. And then, of course, make sure all your plumbing is glued properly. You don't want anything to fail you on the closed loop. All right, let's skip that. Let's go to the next one. There are so many different types of in-tank power heads that you can use, from gyres to, I use the Vortex, to Maxi Jets, to Jabo brand, the wave pumps from Neptune. There's so many different kinds out there. There must be 50 different kinds on the market that can be placed anywhere. And they don't have to always be at the top. Like in my tank, I have these two Vortex. Oh, you can almost not see it. Well, I got one right there in the back. You can see that one at least. And that one It's down from the surface probably, there's probably about 10 inches above that vortec, and it blows straight out. On this end of the tank, they're about 2 inches lower. And I mean, Spock is facing it right now, if that helps you. And the vortex blows straight across, and they blow all the way across. And then up here, I have what are called RFGs, which is random flow generators from Vivid Creative Aquatics. And normally I just say I have penductors, but they're more than a penductor. A penductor is a very small hole that the water shoots through, but there's slits on the side of it that draws in more water. So if you were pushing in 1,000 gallons an hour through the nozzle, it would be coming out like 3,000 to 4,000 gallons an hour. So you're moving a lot of water because you're shooting it through the middle and you're vacuuming more to join it to push a large amount. And the random flow generator is actually a patented thing that he came up with a few years ago. And it's got these twists inside, but nothing moves, okay? So it's just printed to have curls. And if you hold your hand in front of it and just feel the blast, it feels amazing. I mean, I was thinking these things belong in hot tubs. I would just lean my back against one and just enjoy, because it will hit different parts of, if my hand is, a couple inches away from it, it will hit different parts of my hand randomly. It's not like always up here and then once in a while down here. I mean, it literally just keeps moving. Somehow the water twists through it. It doesn't push out air bubbles, so there's no like cavitation. It's just a really neat thing. And I've been running them now for 2 years. I just replaced this one. This one's black and clean because the old one finally gave away. I mean, I'm not even surprised. How long should something hold together under salt water indefinitely? And if it only lasts a year or two and I have to replace it, so be it. The one in the back hasn't given me any problems yet, but I might replace it at the same time so they're kind of the same age. And that way I've got continuously good flow in my tank. So I've got flow from the penductor RFGs, I've got the flow from the vortec pumps, and then I've got some water coming in the tank, the RFGs, from the return pump. But I'm not trying to push all the flow in the tank from a return pump. That was something that people used to do back in the day. They would try to get like the biggest pump they could on the market, like a pool pump, some huge workhorse, and they wanted to push like 20,000 gallons an hour through that, and then just that's all the water in their tank, and they don't need any power heads. They really desired a lot of flow, but nothing to ruin the view of the tank. And invariably, those pumps use so much electricity that it was a very expensive solution. And even then, it couldn't put flow everywhere. It put flow where it was blasting out, and you couldn't put corals in front of it because they couldn't handle it. And then there was areas where it just wasn't moving the water like you'd hope. So a long, 20 years ago, probably, I was, 19 years ago, something like that, I'd started telling people, stop using giant return pumps. I just, from everything I'd read, everything I'd learned, it seemed much more logical to have very slow flow draining down into the sump, because the sump will be quieter that way, and then let all the filtration do its job and then bring it back up. And so very slow flow going through there was all you needed. Just get the water back up to the tank and then let all the power heads in the tank move the water everywhere to create the chaotic flow. Now, we've talked about nozzles in the bottom. We've talked about some vortec pumps or maybe some gyres or whatever you've magnetically held to the glass. What about power heads that have suction cups? Don't use them. The power heads with suction cups will always let go. Always will let go. Suction cups just don't do well in saltwater tanks. I don't know if they do well in freshwater tanks, but they don't do well in saltwater. And they just let go, and then the power head falls, and it blows your sand bed everywhere. And you might wake up or come home from work, and half your sand bed is all on the other side of your tank, and there's just this power head just dangling and bobbing around and just blowing everything that way. And corals start dying because it did unearth some garbage down there that just polluted the tank. So if you are using any kind of power heads with suction cups right now, number one, find a way to clamp the power cord to your canopy or to the back of the tank, so if it lets go, it can't do anything but just kind of like turn, but it can't fall to the bottom. Okay, so lock that power cord into place so that way your power head is limited to what it could possibly do if it were to let go. Or look for some kind of a brand. There was one that came out a long time ago for the MaxiJet line of pumps called Sure Grip. And it was a magnetic holder that had the right notches on it to actually put the MaxiJet on there. And you could magnetically put this pump anywhere in your tank and it would never fall, which is great. but securing the cord would be the first thing you can do. When I ran my 29 gallon, I never had enough flow. I always wanted more. And I kept adding more and more of these Maxi Jet 1200s, which is, it's not really big, but a 29 gallon is not a big aquarium. And I had like 4 or 5 of them jammed in there, and you saw one everywhere. I took one and I turned it upside down and set the motor on the sand and had the nozzle just blowing behind my rockwork to create this circular movement in the tank. And it didn't touch the sand because, number one, it was sitting on the sand, so the nozzle couldn't like aim down. It was just pointing straight out and just moving water, and it worked perfectly. So you can actually put power heads in a spot you might not think of by just changing the orientation. Another trick that I like to do in a smaller tank is to put a power head blowing this direction and a power head blowing this direction, and it bounces off the glass and comes back into the tank. And by doing that, you create kind of a collision course of the water hitting and ricocheting off the glass and then bouncing off itself, and you will get this good movement, like a couple of gyres intersecting and slamming into each other to create chaotic flow, but it won't touch your sand bed. So these are some thoughts that you can keep in mind. And then finally, it's really important that the surface of the water in your tank ripple. There should be some good movement. It should not be still. It should not be smooth. This is not a lake. It's not supposed to be calm. It's supposed to be ocean-like. And the surface of the ocean is always doing something all the time. And my camera is angled to where you can't look up, but beautiful, beautiful ripples on my tank right now. And that's how it should be. So you may need one power head actually pointing upward to create some activity, because this promotes gas exchange. It promotes getting CO2 out and oxygen into the tank. It gets rid of the oily film that could accumulate on the top of the tank that could actually inhibit gas exchange. And, the oily film also will block some of the light. I mean, just a little bit, but why waste anything? If you're paying for electricity and you're paying for those lights, you want the lights to get through the water to the corals. We don't want to waste that. So make sure you have one pointing upward. There's other methods. There's a gizmo that Two Little Fishies sells that I've seen on display at MACNA, but I've never seen, on anyone's tank. And it was this drain system with a return that somehow did this weird motion to where it would create like a rocking effect. And it seemed to be really quiet, and I need to learn more about it, but that was one thing I came across. I've also seen gizmos on the market that literally was like a paddle sitting in the water with a motor that was above the tank, and the paddle would just do this all the time, and it made the water it made ripples. It was a funny thing. I don't even know if anyone ever bought that. I mean, I'm sure we all thought, what is that thing? So you've got that as another method. Another trick that works for making flow move in your tank that should not affect your sand bed is the sea swirl, which is a motor that sits on top of the tank. It clamps somewhere, and your plumbing goes into the top of it, and then underneath it, a pipe comes out with an elbow, and then you have like lock line on the end or the RFG or whatever you want. And then as the water is pushing through from the return pump and just shooting out in the tank, the sea swirl will move very gradually as much as you need it to be. It can move 90 degrees, it can move 180 degrees, a big sweep, and it will just literally move back and forth very slowly. I mean, you have to sit there and stare at it to watch it actually make the slight change because it's doing it so gradually. But sea swirls were very popular back in the early 2000s. People still use them to this day, but you don't hear a lot of people mentioning them. It's one of those ones I keep thinking, oh, that'd be kind of neat to get for my reef tank, but I just never do it. But if you were trying to do that, and you had one like right here, and it was moving the flow back and forth through here, then possibly my second one might be somewhere else in the tank, maybe this corner, fanning the opposite direction. So I'm constantly changing the flow in the tank, but I'm changing the flow in the upper level where we want fish to swim and not affecting the sand bed at the bottom, because we don't want to bother our sand bed. Okay. And then I just caught this on the corner of my eye. Sean says, what about the Tunzi wave box? There you go. The wave box came out in the early 2000s as well. It was a square box that hung in the front of your tank, and there was a Tunzi turbelle inside of it, and it would cycle on and off. And it would just like pulse out this water, and you had to dial it in exactly right, and then you had these waves. And everyone's like, oh my God, your corals are doing this now. It's amazing. My gorgonian is going back and forth just like it would in the ocean. I'm so happy. And people thought, that's what I got to get. And then it wasn't long after everyone got these wave boxes that people were saying, well, how long will the silicone last in my tank now? And the answers coming from the manufacturers like Tunzi and even Vortec pumps that do wave, they were saying that your tank might have a lifespan 20% less than you expect. So you get waves, but you're pulling your tank apart. So I chose never to do waves. I never saw the appeal. I didn't like watching the water move in the tank like that, or watching the livestock do this, or seeing a fish kind of doing this number. That just, I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like it. But these are methods that move water in your tank. So thanks, Sean, for bringing that up. That was a good one. All right. Now, I should mention with the vortec pumps, you can't angle them any direction. They go on the glass and they push water out. But as they push water out, they suck water in. So there's an ebbing and a flow that's happening. You've got the ebb going into the pump and you got the flow. So I have actually had corals growing this direction as they're being sucked toward the vortec. And the water's pushing out, and yet the coral is growing toward the push, which is so odd looking. And I've had it where I ran a pump so strongly, like that one in the back, blew so hard that all the sand here in the front, 3 feet away, moved. It bounced off the glass and pushed all the sand away. So I had to dial it into the right amount. But I've never felt the need whatsoever ever with a vortec pump to angle it. And that was something that a lot of people kept saying, well, I want to be able to point it a certain way. You don't need to. It is moving water by pushing outward, and it's moving water by sucking water in. And between those two things, everything is moving. And then there's like 4 or 5 or 6 modes now. There's lagoon, there's reef crest, there's nutrient export mode, there's waves, pulse, steady. I mean, that's 6 different types right there. You can program them in, and you can actually have them do all these different modes throughout a 24-hour period. So you could have, for example, there was people, I remember that would set up nutrient export mode, and their vortex were doing this weird, like, and they were doing that intentionally for like 2 or 3 hours once a week. And it was to get everything off the rock work. It would literally just make the stuff lift off the rock and get into the water column and then get sent down to the drain to hopefully be caught in filter socks or a protein skimmer or batting or whatever it is you use to capture waste. But, you just have to decide what's best for what you like looking in your tank, what you want to see, what you want to listen to. For me, a pump that's just basically running at a certain rate, 60%, 80%, whatever, just steady, it's going to be a lot less obtrusive to me than something that's going up and down and up and down and up and down all the time. And that was a big complaint. A lot of people bought vortec pumps and wanted to do wave mode. And then they'd hear the motor and it irritated them. Now, the vortec throughout the years got upgraded to the quiet drive, which is very quiet. I've had people walk in and say to me, hey, you want to go to your room? Be nice. Still streaming. They don't want to hear you talk. Sorry. If Jack barks, protect your eardrums. Shh. All right. With the quiet drive, the vortex are essentially dead silent. I have a hard time hearing one, and if anyone ever complains that their vortex is too loud these days, it's not aligned right, or the wet side is old and needs to be replaced, if it's a quiet drive, it's a quiet drive, and you can use pretty much any mode, and you shouldn't hear it much at all. I mean, it's essentially, the loudest thing in my tank used to be the protein skimmer, and then I replaced that, and now everything's quiet in my tank. The loudest thing in my tank now is the water draining out of the algae scrubber. I don't hear any of these pumps. And right now we're using the microphone on the Mac. I'm not even wearing a mic because I've noticed on a couple of streams it seems like we're okay. So I haven't had to do that. I don't know what the Instagram sound is like because it's using the iPhone microphone, and that thing can grab everything. Anyway, so there are some things that we've talked about today for sand beds, and I'd like to also answer some of your questions. So if you have some in here, I hope that you did at Me Loves Reef. I should have told you that much sooner. If you want to ask it again, you can now, because now I'm going to go to all the questions here on YouTube. Oh, Macy's daddy, where he is, it's going to be 114 degrees today. Rick says, I have Tropic Eden and I love it. Let's talk about this. So Jamie says, I just cleaned mine, his sand, and since doing that, I've been battling a brown film, which I think is diatoms or maybe some kind of brown cyano. Any tips, as my plan is to add more nacerius snails to keep the sandbed tumbling? The first rule of figuring out what's on your sandbed is to turn off your blue lights and turn on your white lights so you can see what it looks like. Because people will say, well, I've got this really weird black algae, which is actually red cyano. Under blue lighting, it may look kind of black or purple, but if you can get some real light on there, or grab a flashlight, or turn on the light on your camera and look at it, kind of see what you're dealing with to identify what it is so you know how to handle it. If you just recently cleaned your sand and you're starting to get a little bit of diatoms, that's okay. Just so you know, my frag system that we completely cleaned out, I mean, I vacuumed it down to not a drop in the tank, poured in 2 bags of dry sand, and added 60 gallons of salt water. And within a week, I had this brown stuff all over my sand. And another week, it's gone. So diatoms are temporary. And if you have them for weeks or a month, it's almost done. You know, it doesn't have to be forever. Don't worry about that. If for some reason it's perpetuating much longer than you expect, there's a chance you're running your lights too long or you're feeding your tank too heavily and you're just kind of fueling this thing and it can't go through its cycle and go away. And when I say cycle, I'm not talking about cycle, I'm just talking about the diatom period of endurance. But yeah, I was looking at, let me go take a look. No, I'm wrong. There's still a little bit in the corner. Just a little area. It's got some of the brown stuff on the sand because it's a spot with almost no flow. But other than that, if you have decent flow in the tank, those diatoms on the surface should be getting consumed and being distributed, and they'll go away. So I would just do that. I wouldn't take it any further. Yvonne says it's hot in Orlando. What is going on with the weather? No one's updated me. I'm so confused. Let's see. Hernando says, DSBs, deep sand beds, rule. Yeah, I love them. Thank you very much for the super chat. That was super nice of you. So Mike says, I just tore down my reef tub. He had one of those big feeding troughs from Rubbermaid. And he had initially planned to getting back to cleaning out the sand and getting the snails. And he says he totally forgot about the wrasses down in that sand bed. And that's something that can happen when you're breaking down a tank. And for example, I have some footage of Dwayne. I didn't have any time this week to work on that video yet. But I got video of Dwayne taking out the big, huge cactus pavona. And I followed him as he went into there. And he's holding it. And I kept saying, hold it up in front of your head. Hold it in front of your head. Because it's bigger than your head, which is kind of cool. And as he was doing it, an anthias fell down onto towel. So it was a soft landing, fortunately. And I took the camera and I go, ah! And then it's over because I didn't keep it running. So when that video comes out, you'll have to be really alert so you don't miss it. But you'll see this bright orange thing just drop out of the coral and hit the towel. And then, of course, we put it in the tank. So livestock can be inside rock. It can be inside the deep sand bed. It can be in the overflows, too. That was another unfortunate thing that happened many, many years ago. I had to break down a 215-gallon aquarium that was my temporary tank while the 400 was being repaired, and I was missing an angelfish. And when I broke down the tank to get it ready for the buyer so he could take it, I took the the Durso drains out of the overflow boxes and let them drain completely because I wanted to remove the plumbing and clean out the tank and everything ready. And I never thought to look in the overflows at all. And then when he got there and we're taking the tank outside, there was my angelfish dead inside the overflow box because there was no water left. And I felt so badly. I mean, there was probably like this much water. The fish was probably on its side. And it just died in there because I didn't know to even look in there. So when you're breaking down an aquarium or you're cleaning it out, look everywhere. Look at everything. Grab a flashlight. Get a good look and see what you may have overlooked to avoid that. I just assumed I'd lost it. Like maybe the bubble tip ate it. Or it died behind the rockwork and worms ate it. I just forgot about that fish. And so that was sad. But yeah, when you're doing sandbed maintenance, or if you're doing if you're going to vacuum your sandbed, don't do it while the wrasse is still asleep. Pick a time of day when everything's out and about, so you don't like take that tube and just cut your fish in half accidentally. That'll be horrible. Public service announcement number 1. Regis says, if I need to move from my apartment, and I'm planning a tank transfer from a 65 gallon to a 90, can I transfer my actual sand? Great question. If the sand bed is 6 months old, you can just scoop it out and put it in the next tank. If it's 6 months and a day, I tell you, wash the sand out and just put in clean, damp sand in the new aquarium. And possibly grab, okay, so here's another thing you can do. Before you drain the tank, while it's still kind of running, like let's say you've drained a lot of water, you've taken some rocks out, grab a cup or two of the sand, just scoop it out, and put it in a Ziploc bag, and then float it somewhere. And that way, for example, let's say, Regis here is moving, and he's got his livestock, and he's got like a trash can filled with fish, an air bubbler, and put that Ziploc bag in there. And don't forget about it. Don't leave that bag of sand in there for days or anything like that. I mean, this is literally you're moving things to a new tank, right? And that way, when you get to your new destination and you've washed out your sand and you throw it in the new aquarium, the 90 gallon, then as you add water and you've got all the water, you've got water higher than the sand bed, right? You can then take your Ziploc bag and you can open it right over the surface of the sand and distribute some of the live sand, the sand that you saved, to repopulate your washed out sand bed. So you are actually saving a couple of cups of bacteria-laden sand, maybe some spaghetti worms or who knows what, just little bugs, and all those guys will go into your new sand bed, and then they will just spread out and go throughout the whole thing. And then you can add your rock, and then I like to take like a big platter and put that in the aquarium. Oh, here's another thing about working with sand. When you got to fill up the tank and you don't want to have a cloudy mess for days. So a couple of things that work really well. One technique that a lot of people do is they take a big trash bag and they lay it on top of the sand, and then they pump the water in, and the water hits the trash bag, and the bag just gently rises up as the tank is filling up, and then finally you just remove the bag. For me, I don't do the trash bag method. I like to take a platter or a plate or something heavy and set it down on the sand, and I like to put a vase on top of that, and then I pump the water into the vase. The water goes in the vase overflows onto the plate then distributes the water evenly, and I don't get a cloudy tank. Also, with your new sand in the tank, you may get this cloudiness, and if it's just a tank with sand and water, the cloudiness may seem to stick around to perpetuate for days, a week, longer. If you are using live rock and you put that in the tank, within 12 hours the tank is clear. If you use dry rock, it will take a longer time. Live rock is amazing stuff. I was talking with another YouTuber just a few days ago, and she said, man, you really love live rock. I said, oh, I totally do. Live rock is amazing stuff. It is the best, and you guys are just missing out on the good stuff by using all this dry rock because of your fear of pests. Pests are cool. So I hope that helps you with your move. He also said that his apartment's only 10 minutes apart. So fantastic. That means the sand in the bag won't suffocate. It won't take a long time. But that's what you do. Branson's here from Dubai. And Brian is here from the Philippines. Wow, we got the international crowd going on here. Alex says, what causes the sand to turn hard in the tank? Is it precipitation from low magnesium? There is something that happens. I thought it was a calcification, actually, not a precipitation. And you will just suddenly get these weird patches where the sand is just turned hard as stone, and yet all the rest of the sand bed is not. And all I can tell you is this. Whatever turns hard as stone, do not break it up and try to keep using it. Something bad happens in your tank. I can't explain it. All I can tell you is remove the hardened piece, throw it away, and if you want to add some more sand, you can. But I had a tank that did that once, and I tried to break it up because I was being stubborn and trying to save money. That's sand. How much is sand, And I just had nothing but problems with the corals after that. And I was like, man, what was in that stuff I broke up? So I just, if it ever happened again, which is super rare, I think it's happened like twice in, 24 years of being in this hobby. I just took the piece out, no matter how big it was, and I just threw it away and moved on with my life and had no problems. So something is happening chemically. It has to be an overdose of something that happened once that did the right combination to create that. But I don't have a more specific answer other than to tell you how to solve it, remove it intact. Hillbilly Reefer says, bare bottom tanks make it easier to get rid of the detritus, which keeps the nitrates down. Deep sand beds are known for detritus buildup, hence the high nitrate. We'll never have never have sand again. Fair enough. And one of my friends, 1,000-gallon reef, bare bottom, and he's been growing corals all over the bottom, and his detritus goes everywhere. And he had this weird coral in the middle on the glass. It was pretty big, almost as big around as a dinner plate probably. And there was something in the center, and I kept looking at it and said, what is that? What is it? Because my brain could not comprehend what I'm looking at. It was some weird something happening, and I didn't recognize the coral. And he says, oh, that's all detritus. And I was like, what? And he said, that's all detritus. It is all gathered up in there. And he says, it's ugly. And I was like, I can't believe, it's like a city. It had grown into this weird thing in the middle of whatever was the underneath of some kind of a coral. But at least it went to one spot, and then he could vacuum it off, which apparently he didn't do very often, because when I came over, I was thinking it was like the sea monkey city, where you put the crystals in water and it grows. It was so weird. And I didn't even think this must be a detritus pile. So, there you go. Sky Marine says, can you add more sand to an existing sand bed? Yes. I discussed that a while ago. You probably asked the question before I got to that part, but you definitely can. St. Nova says, do you think a large container of sand in the sump will offset the swings of a bare bottom tank, known to go through during tank maturity, such as dinoflagellates and stuff? Yeah, they call that a remote sand bed, or remote deep sand bed. And there was some talks about this years ago. I don't really know too many people that did it, but occasionally you come across a guy who had their sump, and they had like 2 or 3 buckets of sand, and the water just went from the sump into each bucket and out. It was a bunch of sand, and the water just kind of flowed across. I always wondered if the water was like going down and coming up, because it was just water in, water out, water in, water out, water in, just across the buckets. But that was their method of having a deep sand bed without looking at one. And the premise was that it could do all this wonderful denitrification, but it takes up a lot of space. And so you have to be able to do that. But I do know that, like, for example, if you had a sump and you had a refugium zone and you wanted to make a deep sand bed in the refugium zone, Dr. Ron Shemek said that that's pointless. He said the surface area is so small in your refugium. What are you talking about, 12 inches by 6 inches or something? He says it just can't do anything. It's not big enough. And he was one of the ones that actually promoted the deep sand bed with the oolitic sand back in the day. And he was recommending, 4 to 6 inches of sand. That's a lot of sand. And yeah, so having a remote deep sand bed could possibly work. If you had like this big Rubbermaid trough and did like a lagoon thing going on there, and the water flowed in and there was all that sand, that'd be kind of cool if you had the space and you could grow mangroves and look at clams and all kinds of cool livestock. That'd be really fun and interesting and get the benefit without having to look at it in your tank. But I would still look at your tank and think it's a museum piece because there's nothing underneath. Mike says, sand is worth cleaning only if you're using salt water. You're killing off all the bacteria. Otherwise, 40 pounds of Ocean Direct is $30. Lots of work saved for $30. If you have that much salt water to where you can wash out all the detritus out of your sand bed, that's fantastic. But I've never worried about the bacteria in the amount of sand I was washing because I knew I was going to seed it with new. Like, for example, when I did the Tropic Eden in this tank in 2011, I had bags of dry sand and I had trays like you get chicken or pork chops or something from the supermarket. It was these trays with like the plastic you peel off, and that was their live sand. And I must have had 12 of those little trays. And so I put in all the bags of sand, and also in the refugium. And then I took the trays and I lowered them in and poured out the live sand on top of all of it, and added the salt water, of course, to fill up the tank. And within a few days, I had these little snowflakes all over the glass. It's a type of a jellyfish hydroid that sticks to the glass. They're really cool. You get to see them for a couple of days, and then they're gone. You never see them again. But it's proof that something was in that live sand if you see anything on the glass within a couple of days, right? And then when we washed out all the sand, because the tank had leaked and we had it rebuilt, and I got the new tank in, and I put in all my nice, clean, washed sand, I got more of those trays of live sand to reseed it. Now, I didn't have the ability to like wash it out rapidly and reuse it. You know, like for example, in Mike's situation, he's literally washing the sand and putting it in the next tank it's going to go in, and he's saying to save all that bacteria. That would be ideal, but it's going to be really hard to have enough water to do that, in my experience, because I'm literally, you know, garden hosing, watching, I don't know, hundreds of gallons of water go down the street. I have no idea how many gallons. I have no way of measuring the water coming out of a garden hose. I've never even thought about it. But I would do bucket after bucket after bucket after bucket after bucket of sand. Also, a healthy little tip I'll throw in here: if you are washing out sand in buckets and then you want to put the sand in your aquarium, don't use the bucket to put it in the aquarium. And I'm going to tell you why. I made a big, big mistake when I was scaping this tank, the first tank, the one that leaked. And on the first day, as I'm putting in the sand for the first time, it was wash sand or something. I can't remember what it was, but there was a reason I had this bucket. And as I'm putting it in, the metal handle was rubbing the glass as I was tilting the bucket. And I had my arm between the glass and the bucket to make sure that I wasn't making contact with the glass. But my friend Wes was here, and the metal part was on the guy. He goes, "Mark, move the bucket." I'm like, "I got it. I'm fine." He's like, "The bucket." And I'm like, "Dude, I see what I'm doing. It's fine." And then he's like, "The handle." And I was like, "Oh." And I saw it, and I actually carved this horrible squiggle in my glass. The first day of the tank, I was so mad. I was so mad. I ruined a very prominent spot on the tank that you'd be looking at corals all the time, and that thing was there forever. And when the tank leaked and had to be replaced, you know, I just said, well, we'll get the glass. The glass will be replaced too, and that took care of it. But that was so frustrating. So I highly recommend when you wash your sand out, pour it into trash bags, you know, like the white ones, like the 13-gallon bags, because a trash bag has nothing sharp on it, and you can hoist the bag up, put your hand underneath, put it in the tank, flip it over, and just pour it out. And that way there's no chance. Now, if you were just dumping sand from the bucket to fall into the tank 30 inches, 36 inches, kunk, to the bottom, that's your choice. But for me, I tend to lower the sand in and pour it out rather than dropping it from way up high. And I would just suggest that you don't do that. But if you are, put it in bags and don't risk using the bucket that could possibly, or rip the handles off your bucket so it's all plastic. That was so frustrating. I couldn't believe I did that. I was so mad at myself for so long. Every time I saw it and I'm cleaning the glass, I'm like, grrr, that was me. I did that. All right, looking for the next question. Ah, and thank you. I see some comments saying, the tank is looking really sweet. Thanks. This camera helps a lot. I'll do some zooming in for you guys too. Wichita Falls Fish Keeper, thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate that. He says I'm amazing. Here's something that I don't know if there was an earlier comment, but John says, if you have a critter that digs and disturbs under the rock, it will settle and possibly kill the critter, or maybe the rock moves and hits the glass. So when we were talking about sand beds before, I didn't even touch on what goes on with your rock or how the rock should be, because if you fill the tank with sand and then you put the rock on top, so the rock is sitting on sand, if anything is digging or tunneling or moving sand, your entire aquascape could be shifting and falling. Now this tank here, all of this rock is sitting on acrylic supports. I actually created these big pieces of, 3/8 acrylic with acrylic pillars coming up, and it took all day. It took forever. I never want to do it again, ever. But I literally made sure every single peg of acrylic was the right height so that each of the bottom rocks was supported in 3 places like a tripod. So when I put the rock there, that rock will never move. If all the sand blows out of my tank, the rocks will be floating on the acrylic support system, and then the next rock, and the next rock, and the next rock. And I did it with every single bottom rock in this tank. And then, I built my rock work up, and no matter what we do in the tank, everything stays. and I don't have to worry about any kind of creature moving my sand or like through the gills or through its bowels like the cucumber that could just consume so much sand and move it. Or even if I had a power head blow all my sand out from under it, my rocks aren't going to collapse and cause the rocks to hit the front panel or the back or the side. And so that's what I chose to do. Other people, I've seen pictures where they'll put egg crate in the bottom of the tank on top of the glass, and then they put the rock, and then they put the sand. And so the lower half of the rock is actually buried under sand. And that also will avoid the rock ever moving. Number one, the rock is sitting on a solid surface, and because all those little squares in the egg crate, it's kind of got some traction too, so it's not just like bare glass. The idea behind the egg crate is that it's dissipating. You don't have any pressure points on the bottom glass panel specifically. It's more spread out. However, that's 1,000 little square holes that can just trap waste that you'll never get even with a gravel vac. You just can't. So you have to decide if you want to do that. I did the acrylic support system because I work with acrylic, and I thought it was a great idea until I had to do it, and then it really sucked. And I mean, it took forever. I think Wes was here to help me on that day, and he was like, how much more? And I was like, I know. I hate this. I hate every minute of this. This is a terrible idea. I'll never do this again. He says, well, we spent all this time already. Let's just finish it. And I mean, I feel like that was like 14 hours or some stupid thing that just took forever. But it's been under my rocks for 8 years and no surprises. And even while Dwayne was here, he said, how much of this rock is secure? I said, everything on the bottom will not move. And those were even cemented together with something from Marco Rocks. He has some kind of a cement mix. It's almost on my brain, but I can't quite think what it's called. Anyway, I did that so that those rocks were on their acrylic supports and bonded together. Then the other ones were put on top. And there was a few spots where I put some putty to kind of hold it together. And as Dwayne was working in the tank with me recently, I'd say, hey, look right there. And you can see one acrylic rod sticking up through the sand. He's like, oh, there is one. There's a whole bunch. There's probably 60 under there total, maybe more. And that's what keeps it from moving. So we definitely want to make sure that your rock structure does not move. You don't have a quicksand effect to where the sand is moving and the rocks are tumbling and you're trying to catch it, because you have two hands and you always need a third in a quicksand event, because as you're holding two things, you need a third arm to grab that thing and push it under the two things you're holding. And you never have that third arm. Never. Even if you had a helper, they don't know what you need. It's just, we need a third arm. Problem Prone says, what are your thoughts on keeping a blue spot jawfish in relation to the temperature debate as well as the proper sand bed for them? I don't have an answer. I really don't. I've never kept that. I've thought it's really pretty. I would look and see what the recommendations are on Live Aquaria's website. That would be my Bible. I'd see what they recommend and then proceed along those lines. If it needs to be in a cooler tank, great. I didn't even know that. They're so pretty, and I always see a picture. Someone always has one somewhere, but I never have learned about that fish to answer your question. Glenn says, tonight's video picture showing your aquarium is the best natural color yet. I can see every small coral colors without being too sharp to see it watching it on my TV. Well done. Hey, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Yeah, the D500 is doing a great job. And like I said, in a couple minutes here, I'll zoom in on some stuff for you guys so you can see. And Marcus's Reef says, cleaner sand and water changes will definitely help with the nitrate issue. I agree. As a matter of fact, I've been sending pictures of my test kit to Dwayne, and he has the googly eyes like, your nitrates are still up. I'm like, yes, they're still there. It's a gradual thing. I don't like to rush anything. Mahmoud says, I made the mistake of having a sand-sifting starfish in my tank very early on, and it completely wiped out my sand bed, and I've been dealing with dinoflagellates ever since. Yeah, that's one of the things that happens. You'll get nuisance algae growing, or you'll deal with dinoflagellates. You could even have cyano. Just once the sand bed is dead, everything goes wrong. So that's why we need the sand to be alive. And so these different products from different companies like Brightwell, for example, where they have Microbacter 7 and these kind of bacteria you can, or my Prodibio that I add every 15 days. These are all beneficial things that keep that sand bed healthy so you can continue to enjoy your tank and not fight it. But yeah, the sand sifting starfish is a terrible choice for a reef tank. Justin says, do you have any hermits in your tank? I do. Do they leave the conch alone? His said they killed my fighting conch. Wow. I don't know if it killed it. Maybe they did. They shouldn't have that ability. Number one, the fighting conch is a much bigger animal. Maybe the conch was on its way out for whatever reason, and the hermits were eating it when you walked up and saw it and thought these murderers killed my conch. It'd be really hard to imagine hermit crabs being that destructive to something so large. I mean, for example, let me compare this to something else. A long time ago, I went to the fish store and they had this beautiful creature. And it was some kind of a slug. I didn't know what it was. And it was a tiger cowrie. I was going to say leopard. A tiger cowrie. Big, big shell, kind of the size of a lemon in half. And it had this mantle that came up over it and had all these bumps and all these spots. And so beautiful. And I put it in my 29-gallon, and it lived like 2 days and died. And I was like, what? And I thought, oh, I must have just got a bad one. So, a couple weeks later, I'm at the store, and there's another one. So I bought it again. And I thought, well, maybe I was hungry. So I put it in the tank, and it didn't live very long either. 3, 4, 7 days, something like that. A couple months later, I come across another one, and I was like, okay, let me get one more. This time, I'm going to feed it. And I would actually get romaine lettuce, and I'd wash it, and I'd put the romaine lettuce on the substrate, and I'd put the cowrie on top of it, and it would eat every bit of the leaf. It just consumed it all. I was like, oh, and you'd have just a stalk. I was like, aha, now I know what I need to do. And I had that cowrie for a very long time. I just had to feed it really well on a regular basis because the tank was so small, and there wasn't enough area for it to work on the rocks. It didn't have a lot of glass. It was just too small. I ended up putting one in this tank. It ended up moving into the 280, and then one day I just couldn't find it. But in this tank, I had one for probably 4 years. I found it in one of the fish stores when we were doing the LFS tank tour, where we go to each fish store. And I found one. I was like, I loved it. I bought it. It was huge. It would go on my glass. It would hug a vortec. It would go into the rocks. It would knock the hammer coral directly into the sea bay anemone. I'd have to move the coral back up and lose some heads. And then 2 months later, it would knock the hammer coral into the sea bay, lose some more heads, put it back up. And it was kind of a bulldozer, but it was my pet, and I loved it. And then eventually, one day, it was just gone. And, it was picked clean. I mean, it's so funny. When these animals die and you discover it, usually you discover an empty shell. And everyone's like looking away like, wasn't me. Your hermits are busy picking at algae, and your bristleworms are like under the rock just kind of chilling, and your fish are all swimming in other directions. And you're thinking, who did this, So I don't know that your hermits were that aggressive, but blue-legged hermits are definitely more aggressive, more opportunistic. But perhaps the conch just wasn't doing well in the first place. That's all I can say without much more information. Roji, I think is the name, said, what kind of sand is best for clams? I plan on doing a 50-gallon clam display refugium. I don't think there really is a certain type of sand that matters. The clam will be sitting on top. You may want to put something under the clam, like a clam cradle. Some companies sell those. It's sort of like a little dish. Another trick that I like to do is if you're at the fish store, you ask them, do you have any dead clam shells? And if they do, you put the shell down and you put the new clam in the shell and put it wherever you want in the tank, or in their case, the refugium. And so it's kind of protecting its the byssal foot. The mantle's on top. It's protecting the byssal foot from anything that could be a predator to the base and sneak in. It just works. And the beauty of it is the clam will grab onto that shell and it'll hold on tight. And if you have to move it, you move it with its cradle anywhere you need it, up on the rock, down on the sand. It's just a really nice system to let the clam feel secure, but give you the flexibility to move it if needed. But I can't think of any sand that's actually detrimental to a clam. Oh no. Tech HR said, I made a mistake putting a big styrofoam sheet under my rockwork to protect the tank from the rock. I've been trying to figure out how to remove it for more sand without wrecking my tankscape. It's a nightmare. Like, yeah, that's a reset right there. That's going to be one long day. I think you're just going to have to do it. I can't even think of a way to do it in pieces. I was going to mention another technique that was used was to use starboard, which is cutting board material, the HDPE white stuff that we cut bread on or cut meat or whatever, just cutting board material. And people would buy these big sheets of it, probably about ½ inch thick, and they would put it down to the bottom of the tank, but when they added the water, it floated. And so they'd put like giant tube socks filled with sand on top of it to weigh it down, to hold it at the bottom of the tank. They tried siliconing it, they tried everything, but they had to weigh it with something really heavy so they can get the aquascape on top of it and add their sand. Or no, they didn't do sand because they wanted just to have that bare bottom, but they didn't want to be on the glass, and so they did starboard. But it was very floaty. And man, I don't know what to tell you about your foam other than that's a reset. That's a bummer. Butts says, I can't get rid of the surface film. It's driving me nuts. I have a 15-gallon peninsula with a Nero pump, and the pump won't allow me to direct toward the surface. I hate it. Any tips? Yes. You can go ahead and take printer paper, like off of an inkjet printer, and if you don't have a printer, you can still buy the paper. And just take a piece and lay it on the surface, and then peel it off. And just keep doing that until you get rid of this film. And then you're going to figure out what you can do to keep that surface more agitated. Something's got to change somewhere, somehow, to create a little bit of movement. I know it's only a 15-gallon, you don't have a lot of room, but maybe you could put some kind of a cute little pump down low that's pointing straight up to create like a hill on the surface to kind of just chop it up just a little tiny bit. And that might be your cure. But the nice thing about the printer paper is you're getting 500 sheets. So if you have to blot the tank once or twice a week, you could do it for years with one bundle for $5. Um, B. Spieg says, plastic lock line lasts in saltwater for a very long time. You're absolutely right. That's very true. The plastic used in the VCA random flow generator only lasts for a year or so before it starts to crack. That's probably true too. I mean, I understand that. I've had regular penductors in the past, and they just moved a lot of water, but I never had the random flow that I get from these guys, and I totally love them. And like I said, if I have to replace them once or twice a year, I mean, once every year or two, that's okay. That doesn't bother me. Alex says, what do you think about emerald crabs? They're very nice to have in the tank. They molt in your tank, so it looks like suddenly you have two when you really only have one. They can eat Valonia. You may discover that they might be semi-aggressive with some zoanthids and rip them off their frag plug. That does happen sometimes, but they're not a pest. They're a good, healthy, useful crab for the cleanup crew. They just don't help the sandbed other than walking across it. Flooded Aquatic says, what's the perfect salinity for a reef? I keep seeing different adamant ranges. I've always told everyone 1.026. That's just the great number, 35 ppt. And if you can get that number, most everything that's in our reefs does well in it. The lower salinity is what fish stores use because they're trying to keep fish disease down to a minimum. And so if you were to measure the salinity of fish you bought at the fish store and then measure the salinity of the corals you bought from the fish store, you'll notice they're not the same number. They're running at a higher salinity in the coral tanks, but they are paying for the salt and they want to save as much money as they can. So if they can keep corals alive at 1.023, they'll do it. But I just always shoot for 1.026. My tank tends to be there, or even slightly higher, just a hair. It could be 1.0265, but I see no beneficial reason to have it lower than 1.026. So that is the number that I'm pointing to. Oh, V40, I'm just going to stop there. It says, I'm upgrading my 75-gallon to a 125-gallon tank, but I need the new tank where the place of the 75-gallon is. Any advice in the process? Yeah, so it's no fun, and it's going to take all day, and you need some helpers. But what I would do is I would get some trash cans, some brand new ones that are clean, that have never been used for anything other than, if you have some for salt water, that's fine, use those. And you're going to drain water out of the 75-gallon to fill up the trash can about halfway, or a third. And then you're going to start moving rock into the water to keep it fully submerged so it won't cycle. Because when the rock is exposed to air, anything on the surface, such as sponges, will quickly start dying off, and they can release ammonia into the water. So you take the rock right out of the tank and put it inside the barrel of salt water. And then you get another barrel of salt water from the tank, and you can start scooping up fish because the rock is out of the way, and you put the fish in there with an air stone and a heater, and you put it somewhere safe. You know, the nice thing about the trash cans, they have two handles. You and your friend can actually carry it because it's only a third full or a half full with water. It's not so crazy heavy, two people can't move this trash can, okay? Move it across the room, and then you're going to work your way down the bottom. You may have some corals. The corals can go in like a big cooler, if you have a big, large cooler like you do for a picnic. If that doesn't work, bins, anything can hold water. You can put the corals in there and put in a power head, possibly a heater, and move it out of your way. And then you're going to drain out the last of the sand out of the tank. If the sand bed's over 6 months old, like we were talking about earlier, you're going to have to wash it. If you just want to use new sand and save yourself the trouble, save a few cups of the used sand, put it in a bag, take that tank off the stand, take the stand out of the way, disconnect the plumbing, disconnect the plugs, wipe down the wall, put the new stand in place, put the new tank in place, put the new sand in, put some salt water in there, put in your saved used sand on top to seed the new sand, put down some plastic and a platter and a vase and pump water in. And then the rock that's sitting in the barrel I told you about, you're going to shake it off as hard as you can underwater. Just shake, 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 and that water's going to turn muddy. And then you're going to lift it out of the barrel and put it in the tank with a new clean water. And then the next rock, you shake it off like crazy and put it in one after another after two. And you do that until you've filled up your tank all the way up. And if you can't get everything done, but you just want to get to that point, in other words, fill up the tank to about here so it's not high enough up to drain into a sump. All the livestock will be fine with some kind of circulation, possibly an air pump, possibly a heater, just to kind of have some kind of circulation in your tank, while it's not enough to drain down, but it's water movement with your sand and your rock and your live sand. And you could actually transfer your corals and stuff into that tank at this point too, but then somebody's got to be working on that plumbing to hook up the drains, let that plumbing cure for a couple of hours, preferably. I really like to wait. I like to wait almost 6 hours after I glue branding pipes, but it's kind of hard in what you're doing. But if your livestock, if everything in your tank is in the tank with this much water, you can work on that plumbing all night long. And livestock's safe and sound. You don't need lights on the tank at that point. All you need is just circulation and livestock to be healthy and clean. And then once you've got the plumbing done, what I like to do is have a union as many places as possible. Or if I haven't quite glued everything, like I've glued together most of it. Let's just call it this weird lightning bolt looking thing that goes from where the overflow box is and goes down to the sump. But I haven't quite connected to the top or the bottom. I can then take that pipe outside and I can run a garden hose through it to flush out the glue and the solvent. And what's left is just kind of wet pipe. And then I can dry off the ends and I can do the final two connections, let that cure for a while. Like I said, I like 6 hours. You might want to go shorter. And then you can add more water to the tank and you can add more water to the sump and you can start the return pump and you can get everything going and get the protein skimmer going. And probably put a reactor in the sump filled with carbon, a half a cup of carbon per 50 gallons. So with your 125, you're probably going to want a cup and a half of carbon in a reactor and let water flow through the carbon. Don't just put it in a bag and throw it in the corner of the sump. That's not going to do anything. Not enough. Okay, let me just rephrase that because people are like, what? Passive filtration versus active filtration. Active filtration, you run the water through the carbon and back out. That's what you want to do. And that'll take out the toxins from the glue. It'll take out whatever weird stuff's coming from the rock and the sand and the tank itself. And you will actually have a nice looking tank within the next couple of days. See? And all it did was took all day long and some help. Butts says, what's the best way to calibrate a refractometer? I can't read today. I don't think it's giving me proper reading. I can't dial it in. My salinity is some odd reason. And it's a 15-gallon aquarium. Okay, so number one, a 15-gallon aquarium, the salinity changes really fast. You have to stay on top of topping off that tank probably twice a day to keep it where it needs to be so it doesn't change. The refractometer, you want to use refractometer calibration solution. One of the ones that I sell in my shop is called Accuracy. It's made by Two Little Fishies. It's literally 35 ppt solution. Now, the reason we want to use that is the refractometer is trying to measure 35 ppt, or 1.026, specific gravity. And so by having it calibrate to the number we're aiming for, you're going to have a much better reading than calibrating it with RODI water that everyone seems to want to do. Everyone's trying to calibrate it to 0, when that is so far from where we care that it's actually inaccurate. So you want to always calibrate to 35 ppt solution. So you put a few drops of that solution on there, and then you adjust the tiny screw on the refractometer to make sure the line is at 35 ppt, and now you can check your tank. And if you don't bump the screw, that calibration can hold for a while, for quite a few uses. I don't have to recalibrate mine very often. I can probably calibrate it 2-3 times a year. It pretty much stays steady. I don't have any weird surprises. It doesn't suddenly change. But your tank is really small, so if you haven't automated the top-off system yet, you should. And I saw another thing. The Auto Aqua ATO Micro is perfect for a tiny tank. It has a little tiny sensor. You can have a jug on the floor. The pump fits in the jug. It pushes water up and in, and it will replenish water all day long or all night, whenever it needs to. And it can push up to 6 feet up. So, it's a really nice little system for topping off the little tiny nano tanks. And the sensor holds on with a magnet. So it's very small, like the size of a penny. So I would recommend that for your tank to help maintain salinity all the time. And then he said, I use 35 ppt solution, but it seems off. Well, I don't know what that means. So I hope the things I discussed maybe help. Sam says, one day my yellow tang will get to be like yours. Roach is out and in a good home. Thanks for the trap. Love the tank. I'm sure that the skies are amazing and it will fill in amazingly. Thank you very much. Yeah, Sam ordered a fish trap for me forever ago, and I finally got it out to him. And he's trying to catch this one fish that he named Roach, and everything went in fish trap but that one fish. And I said, well, the timeline is completely imaginary. If you want to catch a fish, you just keep trying until you catch it, because eventually that fish will go in, and he finally got it. So I'm really glad that that fish is no longer in there. Justin says, can I add more sand on my existing sand bed to add more surface area for bacteria, or are they only living in a certain depth? Will burying the bacteria or pods living in it die? Yes, to all of that. You can add more sand. You want to add 1/2 inch more sand on top of what you have now. And if you put more than 1/2 inch on top, you will be burying the stuff that's in the upper 1/2 inch of the current sand bed, and you will smother and kill it. So we put in enough sand to raise it 1/2 inch and let everything migrate up. And then, in a week or two, you put in a little bit more if you want to go higher. I don't know how high you're trying to go, but you just want to go up 1/2 inch at a time, and that way everything will do well. G-Bear says, whose tank is that? I think he's talking about the one behind me. That's mine. Vivek is visiting today from India. Vivek says, I'd like to add sand to my 300-gallon bare bottom. How would you suggest me doing it? You would stop all the flow in the tank, just turn off all your pumps, return pump, everything's off, and you will then take the bags of sand that you bought, hopefully aquarium sand, and that's what I've been talking about earlier in the stream, and you wipe off the bags so they're really, really clean, so there's no weird contaminants on the outside of the plastic. And then cut open the bag and lower it in the tank and lift the bag up, and the sand will pour out, and you just continue and continue until you get all the sand in the tank. And if you're buying sand that's bagged, they probably have dry sand, and they probably have live sand. I would definitely get a couple of bags or 3 of live sand to go in last. So put in all the dry sand into that aquarium, and then put in the live sand, and that's it. Resume the flow. It's that easy with your tank. You don't have a lot of work to deal with in that situation. That'll work out really well. You will, because sand displaces water, you may have to remove some of the water from the aquarium so your sump doesn't overflow. And I told you everything's off, but I'm just going to say it out loud. Your protein skimmer needs to be turned off too, because when you've poured in all that sand and extra water has drained into your sump, and then you say, well, let me turn on my pumps, your protein skimmer will probably start overflowing like crazy in the sump because the water level is too high in the sump. That's what I'm saying. You're going to have to remove some water from the system to make up for all the sand you added, and then we can turn on the protein skimmer when the water line is the right height in the sump for the protein skimmer. And I'm saying you can add all the sand in one shot because it won't do anything bad to your tank. Luis says, do you have any dry side Ecotech pumps on your website? Guess who knocked one off the glass last night? This guy. Ecotech doesn't sell dry sides. No, I mean, you might be able to get one directly from them, through their tech support, their customer service department. But they sell, complete kits, the whole thing. I have the MP40s in stock. So if you needed one of those, you would get that with a brand new wet side. And you'd have extra drivers and extra power supplies and all that stuff from the previous pump that you accidentally broke. Listen, that pump, I mean, if you look at mine right here, you can see the cord is going straight up. And at the top on the black trim, I have that sticky pad that is glued onto the tank, and then I ran the wire through the middle and I put a zip tie around it and tied it tight. If that pump were to separate from the wet side, which occasionally happens, if I bump it, like you said you bumped yours, the wet side will fall into the bottom of the tank. The dry side will hang there because it's tethered to the tank. It's so important to tie those in place, and I tell everyone to do that. So if you aren't doing that, you've got to do that because it's going to protect the pump from damage, because you don't want to fall all the way down to the ground and hit whatever's down there, whether it's concrete, tile. I mean, it might bounce better off a carpet, but no, I don't just sell just the dry side. Sorry. Marcus says, the new look of the tank is exciting, Milos Reef. Can't wait to see it grow and do its thing. A year or two from now, it's going to be epic. Not that it doesn't look awesome now. No, I get it. I get it. Marcus said, what was the final verdict on the D500 error issue? I did everything that the website said to do, including a factory reset. And I, after the stream was over last week, I texted Michael Vargas, who I bought the camera from. And I said, did you ever get this error message? And of course, his answer was like, never. I was like, of course. I buy this camera, and 2 weeks later, there's an error message. And he said, did you take out the battery and put it back in? I'm like, yes. Did you take out the memory card and put it back in? I'm like, yes. I did all those things. But I'm doing it again. And he says, did you have the lock on the memory card? The little thing to like protect it from not being formatted. I was like, I've never touched that lock thing in my life. I never lock a memory card. So I was looking at it. I was trying to even understand which is locked and which is unlocked. And, I couldn't figure it out. And I put in the card for like the 15th time, and suddenly the error message went away. So I told Michael, I said, well, clearly the camera knows I'm texting you, and now it's going to behave. And so after the stream was over and after I was done talking to him, I was able to use the camera. I did a little 3-minute thing last week on this channel where I was using it. Basically, I don't know what caused it. It may have just been the memory card wasn't seated properly, but I have no idea. Even Michael said, the Nikon instructions, like, make sure you use a Nikon-compatible memory card. And then he put in parentheses, whatever that means. And I was like, yeah, I know. What are you talking about? An SD card is an SD card, So as long as it can write fast, that's what matters when it comes to photography. I don't know. I don't know why it wouldn't work. It was very frustrating. I tried fixing it on camera with you guys. And then, I tried fixing it with him off camera, and finally it just behaved. And then today I was kind of holding my breath, and I turned everything on, and it just worked. I was like, okay, good. But I don't know what that was. No idea. Joshua says, what do you keep your alkalinity at? 9.5 is my preferred number. Chris says, nice t-shirt. Thank you. It's a whole coral reef. I have to stand tall so you can see all of it. Michael says, what do you think about adding mollies to a saltwater tank? Some people do that for algae control. They gradually acclimate the molly over into salt water, and then it can actually be picking at algae. I've never done it, but I know some people do. Mike Flores says, I overdose magnesium. What is the easiest way to lower it? It's currently at 1550. Big water changes with lower magnesium in the salt mix would be the first approach. And then lots of big old Monteporas soaking it up. The number is kind of high. Brother Gas says 1550 isn't a problem. It'll come down slowly on its own. But he was saying water changes. Once you get over 1600, your snails stop moving. Their foot atrophies because of the magnesium being so high. So it's good that you caught it when you did. Hopefully it's not higher than what you believe. You can always double check your numbers too. Like measure magnesium 3 times in a row and then divide by 3 to get the average number. Because magnesium, the way the test kits measure it, there is a possibility of getting a false measurement. It's so often what we do with our test kits is we test, we get the number we want, and we move on. And if we get a number we don't want, then we check it one more time. It was like, what? But usually the best rule of thumb, if you have a number that you don't like and you test again and you're still not sure, test it 3 times and divide by 3, and that'll get you a reasonably accurate number, provided that the kit is good. I told you guys I had bought a test kit that was lying to me about my nitrate, saying they were nice and low. And while it made me feel good, I knew it was a big fat lie, and I replaced it with a kit that worked. Chrome Max, thank you so much for the super chat. He says, the reef looks great. Thank you for all your contributions to the hobby. Marcus says, I still use a refractometer, and I am definitely guilty of using RO water to calibrate. It's just, for example, I was on the Neptune support group forum today, and there was a guy who was very angry that he could not calibrate the Neptune temperature probe in ice water, which is 32 degrees. And he said, this is ridiculous, and this probe sucks, and your quality is terrible, and your customer service is terrible, and he's just livid because he's measuring it in the wrong end of the spectrum. We care about what's happening between 76 and 80, basically. So we want to calibrate to that range, not to frozen slush. That's not how you calibrate the probe for the Apex controller. And nothing in the instructions tells you to do that. And he was so upset. One of their techs actually commented on that thread and said, actually, the Neptune probe can be measured between 40 degrees Fahrenheit and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's quite the range. But he said, do not calibrate it in 32-degree water. And see, in food service, if you are working with thermometers, like to check the temperature of the freezer, check the temperature of meat, check the temperature of the grease that you're deep frying French fries, onion rings, things like that, you always calibrate that thermometer in ice water. That's how you did it. But that's food service, not reef keeping. And when he was so mad, I was like, did you work in food service? Why are you thinking you should do this? Where in the instructions did it say anything about get a glass of water, add a bunch of ice cubes, add some water, stir it well, and put your Neptune probe in there? He didn't see any such instructions anywhere. So, my little rant. He was measuring the wrong end of the spectrum. We want to measure in the right range. And when it comes to refractometer, we don't want to measure to 0. We want to measure to 35 ppt. If you calibrate to 35 ppt and then you put your tank water in there, it's going to be very close to that range, right? But your tank will never be close to 0. So you see it's the wrong end of the ruler, and that's why we don't do it. And there's way better scientific answers for this, but the general rule of thumb is don't do it. There are 1 or 2 companies that literally tell you to calibrate with RO water, which is insane. And then there's 1 brand of refractometer that says specifically to use 35 ppt calibration solution. So it's been an uphill battle. I've been telling people for 15, 20 years to use 35 ppt solution. Randy Holmes Farley even came up with an article to make your own 2-liter bottle of calibration solution. 2 liters. That is a lot. You had to put in a certain type of salt and this exact amount of grams of water to make this giant bottle, which you'd think it will last you the rest of your life. But it won't, because each time you open the lid, a little bit of, there's a fraction of evaporation, and the standard becomes imperfect. So you made this huge amount because you need to put 3 drops on your refractometer, and it's kind of like, now what do I do with this bottle? I mean, you can pour it in your tank, I guess. I don't even know. I assume you can because it's salt water. But yeah, definitely calibrate to 35 ppt. And so that's why I love the product that I have on my shop, Accuracy. You guys can buy a bottle. It's like $8, and once a year you replace it. Aquatic Amigo says, do you have any freshwater aquariums? Nope, I do not. That would be a weird thing for a channel called Me Loves Reef. I would have to have a new channel called Me Loves Freshwater. I don't mean to come across vicious or mean. I always make fun of freshwater on this channel. It's like, ew. That's just what I do. SG Reefer says, is Instant Ocean safe to use if the salt has gotten hard in the bags it came in? Kind of, yes. Not ideal. It might be possible to contact Instant Ocean and swap out for new bags. You can try to break it up, but sometimes the salt gets so solidified that it's unusable. It just won't even melt. And you put it in a big barrel, and you stir and you shake, and you're hitting it with a hammer, and it's nuggets in the bottom. It won't completely dissolve. That's the point when you just have to say, okay, never mind. I just have to get a new bag. And whenever you store your salt, always try to press all the air out of it and seal the bag tight, so that way it's good for next time. Because I always have to ship things, I've used packing tape to close the bag. My big barrel that I get that's 500 pounds of salt, that's 1,026 gallons of salt. Every single time I scoop out everything that I need, as soon as I'm done, I very carefully press down on the bag, and there's like this, because it's a barrel, and the barrel is like this tall, right off the ground. About this tall off the ground. And it's got double bags. So there's a bag, and then you open that, and there's a bag inside full of salt. And then I will press down on the bag to push all the air out, because just the air, the humidity in the air, I don't want that in there. And I want to get out. And the reason I'm pressing carefully is as I'm pressing it down, the rest of the bag force up, like the salt dust will blow out into the air around you, and the different elements of the salt could actually get in your eye and give you an infection. So I'm very careful to like press down, make sure my head's away or I'm not inhaling, and get it, and I twist it tight, and I put the zip tie on it, and then I bring the second bag down and press out as much air as I can and tie that up, and then I put the lid on and snap the ring around it. And I've done everything I can to keep the humidity out of my salt so I don't waste a whole lot of salt. With buckets of salt that you buy, there's not much you can do specifically because you can't remove air from a bucket. But if the bucket has a bag of salt inside, you can do what I just described. If you wanted, you probably could take like some kind of, whatever that's called. I can't think of the right terminology. I'm thinking of pantyhose, but just the legging part. You could probably fill that up with rice and just lay it inside there and put the lid back on top. And that way it would absorb any moisture inside the bucket to protect your salt from becoming hardened. You also want to make sure you're not like dipping in with a wet container into your salt and pouring it into, like let's say you're pouring salt from the bucket into a barrel of water and the cup's getting wet. You don't want to keep dipping a wet cup in your dry salt because they're putting moisture into the mix and you could possibly mess it up. Alex says, can I get away with not ever changing sand? No. Aquatic Amigo says, do you stir up sandbed when doing maintenance on your tanks? No, I don't. SH says, dry sand should be rinsed first, in my opinion. Aquarium sand has already been pre-rinsed before it was packaged, so you don't need to rinse it out. If you choose to want to rinse it out, you can. Tropic Eden had something going on with their packaging, and like I said, I used a ton of their sand, and I love it. And you would find these weird bits of plastic. It's like the packaging machine that put the sand in bags. Little bits of the bags would be inside. And there you are looking at your tank, and there's like this little ribbon of blue. And you're like, what is that? And you pull it out, and it's like, huh, I think some of the packaging. And unfortunately, we found some of that. But no, I've never rinsed aquarium sand, and you definitely don't rinse aquarium live sand. You just use it right out of the bag. But if you don't know the origin of the sand, if you have no clue, or if you just got it from the beach or something, then yeah, rinsing it would be really smart. Oh, Michael Baldwin says saltwater aquarium sells the MP40 dry side. Wow, did not know that. Thank you. That'll help the other guy. Justin says, what about mixing granule size? I want to add sand, but I want the large grain size, and they always seem to be at the top of the sand bed. The fine sand looks so good. Detritus is easy to clean. What ends up happening when you mix large grain sand with fine grain sand is they separate, and one goes to the bottom, the other stays at the top. I think, I'm trying to remember, I think the fine goes to the bottom and the large stuff stays on top. So I don't mix them. Mahmood says, recently I saw Reef Dudes interview some guys who were doing a caulk slurry for an added pH boost. What do you think about that? I don't use caulk washer at all. I remember when Anthony Calfa was promoting that idea to actually take a shot glass and mix up some caulk in the shot glass and make it a slushy thing and just dump that in the tank, just pour it in, just literally pour it in. And he was promoting that, and I didn't like that at the time, and I don't recommend it. I know that you could make caulk wasser in a container and let it settle to where there's sediment in the bottom and there's a skin at the top, and then all the water in between the sediment and the skin, that is what you can use, for example, to top off your tank or to dose caulk wasser. Caulk wasser has a pH of 12, and so you'll be very careful with it, because if you put in too much of it at one time, you could throw off the pH in your whole aquarium and hurt it. So the caulk slurry you're talking about is kind of a way to eliminate the risk, but you are dumping in this very dense, high pH slush into your aquarium all at once. I don't like the idea. What if it lands on something you care about and stings it? So I wouldn't do it. If you're worried about your pH, you may need to look at the CO2 level in your home. You may need to look at your protein skimmer to see if it's adequate for the job to push the CO2 out of the system, because that's part of its job. You want to make sure your surface is really rippling for oxygen exchange. And you want to make sure that your alkalinity, your calcium, your magnesium, your salinity, and your temperature are all in the magic box. There's this square box in Randy Holmes Farley's article about water parameters. And if everything's inside the box, somewhere inside that box, if the alkaline is somewhere in this range, if the calcium's in somewhere in this range, if the magnesium's in this, if everything's in the sweet spot of the box, your pH takes care of itself. So I don't really base anything on my tank on pH. I look at the pH, I'm aware of it, but it doesn't drive anything in my decision of care of the reef itself. Brandon says, speaking as a chef, I've had thermometers that were tens of degrees off at the top range when temping steaks, but read ice water as perfectly at 33 degrees. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just remember that we had to do it when I was working in fast food, and we had those. I still have one of those thermometers in my drawer, and I've done that when I calibrated to the ice water, to the slurry, but I don't rely on it for anything. Definitely not my reef tank. Michael says, the Inkbird can be calibrated to 32 degrees. Then you could use it in the aquarium to calibrate the apex to 78 or 79. Yeah. Marcus says, I've been looking for it. Do you still have the F-bomb fish? Thank you for mentioning that. No, I assume it perished during the ice storm that happened in February, because I never saw it ever since. I've looked, and when we worked in the tank, I kept thinking, wouldn't it be cool if we were working down this end and lifting rock and 3 little firefish came out, but never saw a single one. It would have been nice. It would have been a really nice end of the story. Aquatic Amigos asks, how often do you replace your sand and how often? I don't replace my sand, and so never. When I have to take a tank completely down, I wash all the sand and set up fresh. Razor Tom says, could I use silica sand for a reef tank? I don't recommend it. Dwayne's here, everyone, Dwayne's here. Look, Dwayne's here, Dwayne is here. Oh my God, he's here. Dwayne helped me with my reef tank a couple weeks ago. He's actually on vacation right now. He says, talking about refractometers, the further from zero, the further the offset due to the slope. Thank you. See, that sounds so scientific. And then there was something else here I saw. I think Daniel said, what are your parameters again? Well, I haven't tested yet. I haven't checked to see what my numbers are yet today, but typically, today, okay, let's just go into it. Today is water test Saturday. That means test your tank. We want to check alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, nitrate, phosphate, salinity, temperature, and it's nice to log it. So I like to log mine in Reef Trace, which is an app that works on iOS and Android, and gives you these nice graphs, and it has reminders, and it has the LFS locator built in, it has creature ID inside of it. That's really nice and filling in nicely, more and more robustly. I mean, the app does a lot of things, but it's really good for tracking your water parameters. Others like to track it in different places, like inside Apex Fusion, or they have a notepad, or they have a white erase board near their tank. Whatever you want to do, just check your water every single week, because Caitlin said water tests save lives, and she's 100% right. So we want to do that. So I don't know what my numbers are today, but I like to shoot for alkalinity about 9.5, calcium around 410, magnesium 1400, salinity 35 ppt, nitrates 2000. I'm kidding. By the way, I have next to me here some bottles from Brightwell. So this says Neo Nitro on it. This way, Neo Nitro. And they're not empties, I swear. There's liquid in them. I'm not buying empty bottles from Brightwell and taking my tank and pouring it in here to make millions off my nitrate water, no matter what anyone said. But it would be brilliant if I could. So anyway, for those of you that have no nitrate or no phosphate, I actually sell Neo Nitro in the website where you can actually dose it to bring it up slightly so you're not at 0.0. Anyway, when I checked my nitrate last week, it measured 60. I still want it to come down. I'm sure the giant water change and siphoning the sandbed some more, I will bring it down lower, and eventually it'll just come down where it needs to be, and it'll be great because I can start adding some cool things to the tank that I've been holding off on. Birdie asked the question, have you ever kept a Colombian shark catfish in a marine environment? Do you think they're reef compatible? No idea. I know nothing about that. Aquatic Amigos, you're asking the question, how thick should the sandbed be, and can it be too thick or too thin? Why don't you just go to the beginning of this live stream, because I talked about all that in the first half hour. Tech says, do you see any big changes since you took all the corals out in the statistics? Has anything changed? I haven't seen any change, but you know what? I'm not done with the stream yet. I want to start giving you guys some close-ups. So I am going to scroll down to the bottom of this and see if anything's going on here. Reef Dudes asked me, how is it working out for you, the D-nitrate? It's D-nitrator. I haven't used it yet. It's still on my list of things to do. But let me go ahead and get behind the camera and behind the microphone. I won't have any idea if you can hear. I cannot read your comments at this point. But I'm going to kind of zoom in so you can kind of see things. And maybe you can hear me. We'll see what happens here. Jack, you're being so good. Thank you, Jack. Alrighty. So we'll just start off with a nice turn over here, and we will zoom in. I do have some interesting things going on in here. I'm going to get in as much as I can. Okay, so that's the best I can do. So that right there is a stylophora from Dwayne. And then underneath it, let's see how I can adjust all this stuff. Sorry, guys. I'm running everything backwards. That right there was an acro that was in the back of my reef in the coral graveyard that's looking really pretty. And it's starting to get some interesting colors in it. This right here is a giant patch of sunset Montipora that was completely shaded, so I'm expecting it to color up and be really pretty one day. And there is an arm of my red serpent starfish. And then this right here is a giant tongue coral from Australia that I believe, well, I posted a picture. I don't know if we measured it. It might be around 14 inches long or so. Here's a chalice. This guy here, something is going on with this moon coral, and the backside is bone white. Spock, get out of the way. Spock, get out of the way. Rat. You won't even focus anymore. You killed it. So anyway, I'm not sure what's going on. I feel like something is coming out from the rockwork at night and chewing on the back of that coral. I'm very tempted to just put it through the saw and just see if I can clean it up. You know, maybe just cut off the backside. I've got this type of Montipora that's growing relatively nicely. And here's another acro that came from Dwayne several years ago. It's still doing well. And then this metallic, I always think that's a Cephastria too. I'm not 100% positive I got that right. And then this right here was a new coral that I got from Frank's Tanks. That is actually a gift from Eric up in Canada. He gave me a donation. He actually sent me money toward corals. He paid Frank, and I just finally claimed the store credit. So that is a Pac-Man Acropora. And then up here, you can see a white rock. That's one that Dwayne had cleaned and then put in the back to lift the aquascape up. Here is the pieces of the shadow castor that were planted. And then this right here is, I think, what is that? I don't think it's the blue tort family. It might be the blueberry. Not positive. And then in the very back, that is the Lime in the Sky acro, as is this one right here, this big, large, chunky thing. And then there's a little frag right here that Dwayne brought. And I can't zoom in any tighter, I don't think. Yeah, that's as far as this lens will go. So that's that part of the tank. Then up here is a red dragon. And then in front of it, there's another little tiny 1 inch or 1.5 inch frag that Dwayne brought, as well as that brownish one in the background with kind of the purplish hue tips. That one at the top right here. So that's one he brought me. And he had a name for it. It was something strange like KP Acropora or something. And then this is my blue tort, also from Seattle. And right there on the single branch, there was this ugly white nub. And it's finally blue. So the skin has grown over it and the color's starting to come in. And soon that nub will be completely normal. And you won't even be able to tell. Then right behind it is the green slimer, Acropora youngae, which is a old school coral that I like a lot. And Dwayne has it growing in his reef. And so he brought me that piece. And then, of course, when he was here, he said, I should have brought you a bigger piece because your tank's so big. And it's so empty. This one here is going to be a really cool acro one day. I saw, let me move the camera. I saw the colony at Frank's Tanks. And they call it T-Rex, like the dinosaur. And it's got a lot of nice colors, and it seems to be doing well in my nitrate. Look at all my Antheus, all in a little group right now. How cute is that? All right, in the back was a Miliopora from Dwayne, another gift from him when he came here. And then this right here is a Blue Ridge coral, very old school coral, illegal to buy anywhere. It's completely outlawed. I've had that coral since 2002. If you were to break it in half, inside it would be blue. And the skin is shiny when it wants to be, and it can be kind of dull. It's nothing super crazy impressive. It just is what it is. It's just what that is. That species is. The brown skin actually will emit these little white polyps out of it that almost look like snowflakes all over its body. And it will shed, and it'll look super shiny like it's wet underwater, which is the weirdest thing ever. And like I said, I've had it forever, and so it's still in my tank. Then down here, we've got another acro of some kind. And this is some Pavona. Really focus. Really focus. Oh, hang on. So that's some Pavona. And then here's the scrolling Pavona. And this one right here is an Acropora, I believe. There's the sea bay with some of the skunks. I'm freehanding it now, so it's going to be really herky-jerky. Down here, we put a couple of the yellow scroll coral. This is a Acan echinata that I believe is chewing on this chalice. I may have to move this chalice. And then this has a maize coral living at the top.
all that area in the front was covered in Paleothoa that we removed. And then we put a branching Cephastria right here. And then there's a chalice that is really pretty from above. There's a Lobo right there. There's all the hammers and frog spawns and Duncan's in the background, and the Gorgonian is in the very back corner now. And then what did we skip in the middle? So here's some more chalice. That used to be the one that went from here all the way up to around here, and we removed all of it except for this piece. And then here's another chalice down on the sand. This is a Lithophyllon. Right back in there in the shade is my Fungia maker. This is another acro that came from Ryan's 1,000-gallon reef that I've been growing in my coral graveyard. And then this probably is the last coral. This is a Montipora that Dwayne brought me. Fire in the sky. I don't know. I can't remember the name of it now. He'll tell me later. So anyway, that's kind of everything today. This is what the tank looks like. You come around. And you see the sand is white. It's not a lie. It's not Photoshop. Oh, let me see something here. Alrighty, let's see. Dwayne's answering all my stuffs. Look at that. He's putting all the... Okay, so I got to come up here and read everything. Tim says, can you share your opinion about Seachem Purigen? I find it works well to reduce nitrates that have crept high. I've never used it, so I have no opinion about it. Daniel says, what do you guys think about the sulfur denitrator? I haven't used one yet. That's one of the ones I've never tried. SH says, how big does a chalice coral get, or is it unlimited? It's actually unlimited. And actually I have a really cool idea that popped up in my head. So this guy, it's just a potato chip on the sand. And with the current, it just lifts up and moves. And so one of the things that I was thinking about doing was calling, to place an order with Two Little Fishies for more products I sell, like Revive, Coral Glue, whatever. I mean, he sells a ton of things. And I sell some of their products on my website, the Reborn Calcium Reactor Media and so forth. They sell these rocks called stacks, S-T-A-X. And it's just slivers of rock, and you can put them in your tank and have this weird tiered thing. And it looks completely unnatural. I would never do it in a reef tank. But I thought, what if I got myself some stacks and got pieces the right size, and I'd probably cut them on my saw to make them the right size for what I need, and then put this chalice on the stacks, on the sand, so it's secure and has a little surface right above the sand so it doesn't get buried. And anything that has to be down on or near, like this coral down here, it's just shifting and the flow is moving over the sand. If I had a stacks under it, it would keep the coral up where it belongs, and I could kind of correct the sand where it's moving and make everything look right again. And so I was thinking about getting some of those as little supporters, which I think of them as like ideal size frag plugs without the bump on the bottom. So I kind of like that. Dwayne says the metallic orange one is Leptastria. Okay, thank you. And so whatever I pointed to before was a Miyagi Tord. There's a Skyline granulosa. There's a blue matrix, a pink tip stag. The Razzle Dazzle Millie. Okay, the Millie is Razzle Dazzle. And then there's one called Lost Soldier Tort. And then he wants to kill all the Pavona because he's just a horrible person. Look at that. Kill it, kill it, kill the Pavona. He's just a horrible human being. Let's see. There's an Avatar Chalice in the front. Oh, you think this thing here is Avatar Chalice? Okay. A1EX. unless I'm supposed to read that backwards. It does say Alex. The beginning part of this live stream will talk about sand. So I would just go to that when this thing is done. Forest fire digitata. See, I knew there was something about fire. Forest fire. So this little guy right here, forest fire digitata. I'm sure all of you have one, but I did not. So he brought me one. Daniel says, when are you going to get a clam? I might. The problem with a clam is that when you get one, it may not live. And when they die super fast. Now, the only clam I like to buy is the Maxima, and I prefer a very specific color, which is an aqua blue. So if I find that, that's usually when things happen. But when I just see all the others, like, whatever. And then, you got to put them somewhere where you can appreciate them. And really, clams are viewed best from above than they are from the side. And so I don't really know where I'd put it to where I could look and enjoy it. And then Marcus says, thanks, that was a special treat. And Tex says, looks good with lots of space to grow out. That was the whole plan. That was the whole intention here. Oh, nice. Reef Dude says he's done that with a Stax rock. It works like pedestals. Perfect. Tim says, the reef looks really nice since the reset. Love the new frags. Well, guys, we've been talking much too long. Oh, my God, it's 4:30. I have actually closed all the circles on my Apple Watch by doing the live stream. We've been on for over 2 hours, 2 hours and 16 minutes. There's 175 of you. I'm sure at this point everyone's just ready to go live their lives. I hope you guys enjoy the weekend, and we'll be back with another live stream in a week at 2:08 Central Time in Texas. All right? Bye, guys.